It is Tuesday, July 9th. I am calling the Southern Pines Town Council business meeting to order. Manager Parsons, do you have comments? Oh, excuse me. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. All right, Manager Parsons, do you have comments for us?
Thank you, Mayor Clement. Good evening. Relative to your consent agenda this evening, you have 3 items beyond adopting some meeting minutes. You've got an item to ratify a contract with Veolia Water Operations USA. Council may recall back in February work session, Engineer James Mickle was before you to talk about the RFP process we went through and discuss an extension of the water contract with Veolia at the water treatment plant. Our intent was to have a formal long-term agreement before you this evening. However, the law director came across what I'll call recent legislation out of Raleigh that would make it appear that potentially that longer-term contract is going to be subject to LGC review and approval. We are in the process of verifying and validating that. What is before you this evening is simply a ratification of I'll call it a month-to-month contract under current terms until we can get to the end of this LGC question. Depending on how quickly we can get some answers, our intent would be to be before you in August with one of 2 things. Either A, news that we don't need to go through an LGC review process, in which case you'll simply have a long-term contract before you that both Mac and James have hammered through with Veolia representatives and everybody is in agreement on terms. Or B, we will have a required public hearing that is part of the application that will go before the LGC to be then placed on their agenda at their earliest convenience, at which time then we'll come back to council and finalize everything with Veolia. So we're still waiting on some answers relative to which path that will follow. All you're doing this evening is simply ratifying an extension of the contract that expired on June the 30th. Second item on that consent agenda is the approval of the local water supply plan. It is dated 2023. That is not a typo. It's 2023 data that you adopt a 2023 plan on that gets approved in 2024. Within your packet, you saw the approval of the appropriate state agencies of everything that had been sent in by Ron East, our water supervisor, in conjunction with both the water treatment plant and Engineer James Mickle. So 2023 is correct on that. If you reviewed the resolution that was contained in the packet, it did have a typo that referenced a 2021 document. That will be corrected to 2023 prior to final signature. The remainder of your agenda this evening includes a public hearing that will be introduced at such time as we get to that on the agenda, and then a number of action items that include 3 architectural reviews, a watershed protection permit, and then finally, a resolution directing the clerk to investigate an application for annexation and setting a public hearing on that annexation next month at your August meeting. That particular annexation is a singular parcel that is a non-contiguous tract technically, but it is located in the midst of the Warrior Wood subdivision. It's a young couple. They dropped by the office to drop off hard copy of the application, and they're simply, they moved in a couple years back. They're interested in the lower water rate and being sure they can obtain garbage service as they see other homes that happen to have annexed within the neighborhood and simply want to be part of the town. So.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments on the agenda?
Yes, in regard to the typo, can we talk about on the Fourth Amendment to the Agreement for Contract Operations and Maintenance? Is that what you're talking about? There's a typo regarding 2021?
Oh, the water supply plan.
Okay. Can we take a look at that one, which I think is also up for grabs, where we have town spelled T''OWN, T-own, which sounds very French, but I think if we could remove the apostrophe.
We can certainly take a look at that,
that'd be
yes.
awesome. And the other thing that is interesting is it was assigned to the water contract op 1 Shins, and I assume that's, I'm not sure if that's options or,
Options to me, yes.
yeah, if we can fix that one, that would be great too. And I'll happily pass this sheet on down to you to take a look at. Thanks.
Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
I make a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Thank you. Is there a second?
A second.
All right, all in favor, vote by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. And we'll move on to public comments.
If I may just ask for clarification, had we adopted the agenda, or was that to approve the consent agenda? I know I went over the consent agenda, but.
Just approving the agenda. Okay. Yeah, I'll wait until after public comments to, okay. No, that's okay. Maybe I could have said it wrong. All right, public comments. If you want to speak on any of the public or the one public hearing this evening, you can wait until that item comes up. Public comment time is an opportunity for general town comments. Comments are limited to 3 minutes, which Beth will keep time. Just state your name and address if you would like to come speak into the microphone.
Okay, Hugh Minor, Paddock Lane, Southern Pines. Last month, we spent 3 hours kicking around all the issues related to the Knoll Road Greenway project. And as a response to that, I have a document here, which each of you have a copy of it. And I won't, with my 3-minute time limit, I certainly don't have time to go into all of the issues in detail on this document. But it's entitled a Common Sense Proposal. And what it is a recommendation to study and cost estimate the putting of a asphalt path, multimodal path down the east shoulder, which is the other side that has of the road than what was considered previously. Attached to this document is the cost estimate that was done for the multimodal path on the shoulder on the west side. So there's a lot of reference back and forth in this front page to the numbers that are on that cost estimate. So my request is that you seriously consider looking at this. The people that live in Longleaf and Tullamore are certainly not pleased with the current road diet design where you're taking the turn lane away. And this is an alternative that I think would be a win-win situation. All of our residents in Longleaf and Tullamore would be very pleased to have this. We do want to connect to the Greenway and that, but we don't want to lose the turn lane out of the road. So this would accomplish that, and I think it can be done within perhaps around the 2 million mark that you have budgeted and approved for the Greenway connection. So that's all I have to say. I hope that you will go seriously look at this and follow through with a cost study. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Minor. I know, I feel like I'm on top of you too, sorry. Hi, are there any other public comments? Okay, seeing none, we will move on to the consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve it?
I will make a motion to approve the consent agenda with the noted typos in the water supply plan and the water contract.
All in favor, vote by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. I'll now open the public hearing for Z-01-24, the request for conditional zoning to build a cellular tower at 7672 Highway 22. Director Grieve.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, esteemed members of council. My name is BJ Grieve. I'm with the Town of Southern Pines Planning Department. It's the BJ Grieve Show tonight. You get me up here 5 times, and so this is number 1. Here we go.
We all love that.
What you have before you this evening for a public hearing is a request for an amendment to an existing general business conditional zoning district. I'm going to start off by getting you oriented with the property. This is the north end of our jurisdiction. This right here is our fire station. Here's the airport, and this is Wayner Road. You go up the property a little further, and you get to a property that right now has the VCA Animal Clinic on the property, right on the left side of the highway as you're going north. This property was rezoned to General Business Conditional District in 2004, and at that time, instead of just rezoning to general business, which would allow for anything, it was General Business Conditional District only to allow for veterinary services. It had 4 conditions attached to that rezoning, one of which was a 6-foot chain link fence enclosing outdoor pet relief and exercise areas, a buffer of wax myrtle bushes for screening land use, animal use of outdoor exercise area limited to daylight hours, and no more than 4 animals being outside at once. That was 20 years ago. The land use obviously has been there, has functioned in accordance with that conditional district. About 2 years ago, we got a phone call from a gentleman by the name of David. I'm now on 2 mics at once. Hold on a second. Surprised it didn't start squealing or something, yeah. About 2 years ago, we got a call from a gentleman by the name of David Hockey with a company called Tower Co. They were looking for a location for a new cell tower on the north end of our jurisdiction where there are some gaps in coverage. The applicants did look in a number of different places. They will address tonight the different analysis they did on properties that were zoned accordingly and met all the requirements. They were in the right location to get coverage. They were zoned accordingly. And they didn't come up with a whole lot of options, but this property was one. They can speak to the others that didn't work out. But of course, the issue you may remember was that they still didn't meet the 1,000 feet away from a residential zoning district. So they first started by amending the UDO to reduce that feet from 1,000 feet down to 800 feet, which then allowed them to come in with the current application, which is a conditional zoning district, to amend the current conditional zoning district so that instead of just veterinary services with those 4 conditions, they would also allow for towers above 50 feet, which is another one of our uses. Now, as a conditional zoning district, they have submitted a site plan which shows the location of the 100 by 100 square where the tower will be located, the access to make sure that the access works. A copy of the site plan was in your packet. It had different scales. It had a zoomed out scale. If you go to the next slide, please. This is a copy of the version of the site plan that was scaled out that was in your packet. If you go to the next slide, please, it zooms in a little bit. And once it zooms in, you can see that this is how a conditional zoning district works. It shows the site of the existing veterinary services, the driveway going back with the details of the driveway, shows the location. It also stipulates that it is a 155-foot tall monopole tower, 156 to the highest appurtenance because it's got a little antenna on the top. It mentions all the different things related to the site, including the distance from the setbacks, distance from the property lines, the setbacks of the 100 by 100 area from the property lines. And so if approved, according to the site plan, based on the conditions that staff have granted, it would be locked into this site plan. So the tower would be located in this location and it would have the height as indicated. So staff do recommend approval with the conditions as drafted in the staff report. This did go to the planning board on June 20th, and the planning board recommended approval with the conditions as drafted by staff. You have before you a staff report that concludes with some motions for your convenience, for your consideration. If you would like to, after the applicants give their presentation, which of course you may recall is a legislative matter. The applicants were dealing with an attorney this evening, so very, very detail-oriented and is going to give a good presentation, establishing a good basis for the application. But it's going to come off kind of like a QJ hearing, but in fact it's legislative because it's for a particular land use. But him and I have joked about that a couple times. He's just an excellent attorney. And so he's going to give a presentation, and you will see all this evidence to make their case for their request in front of you, because it is site-specific. That's the point of a conditional zoning district. If you feel good about it, you can certainly look at staff's recommended motions or take any other action you wish. You can also modify conditions. That's another thing. But any of the conditions in a conditional zoning district have to be approved by the applicant. And so there are two motions, the first of which is to establish consistency, the reasonableness of the use and consistency with the comprehensive plan. The second of which is to approve with the conditions as listed in staff, and I'm here to help you at that moment with any drafting of language or changing of any motions or anything like that. That's all I have for you. Do you have any questions for staff?
I do not. Does anyone else? No? All right.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Is the applicant here to present?
No clicker, so just tell me when to switch.
Okay.
Go ahead and click that one off if you don't mind.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, members of the council. My name is Mark Tucker. I am an attorney with Fox Rothschild, and I'm here on behalf of the applicant, TowerCo. This is our application to add a condition to an existing general business conditional zoning district. And what I'd like to do this evening is, first I will start with talking a little bit about the property itself. I'm not going to try to reiterate what you've already heard from Mr. Grieve, but talk about the property, talk about why we're here making this request, and then go through and talk about the requirements that are necessary in order for you to vote to approve our rezoning request or adding a condition, and then the information that we have provided as part of our application that supports that. So what I'd like to do is first start by talking a little bit about the property. As you've already heard, it's out on Highway 22. TowerCo has leased leased a 100 by 100 square foot area from the property owner, Sullivan Property. It is currently zoned general business conditional zoning, and it's being used as a vet clinic. And again, we're here to add an additional condition to allow for the construction of a telecommunications tower. I want to clarify one thing. We are not asking to change the general business zoning. In the general business zoning district, a cell tower or a telecommunications tower greater than 50 feet is already allowed with a special use permit. So we're just adding that condition that's already permitted in the zoning district. Again, here's your property. You've got the airport, the new fire station, and then our property right here with the vet clinic on the front of Highway 22. Why are we asking for this? You may remember from the last time I was before you, we had this map, and what we have here is existing cell towers in Southern Pines. And just so you have a point of reference, our property is way up here in the top left corner. As you can see, the towers, existing towers, dominate down south of of our proposed tower and the subject property. This is an RF study, and what this shows for you currently is cell coverage in the area. So right here in the middle is our proposed tower, and then you can see over here, green is best, blue is one step down, yellow, you're getting spotty coverage, red is real bad coverage. So you can see our location surrounded by yellow and red. With our proposed tower, this is what happens. We go from yellow and red to predominantly green, and then a little blue as you move further away from the tower. You've already seen this, but real quick, this is the site plan that we submitted as part of our application packet. Just a couple of comments on this. From the existing vet hospital is a 30-foot wide easement, but what you have in the middle is a 15-foot gravel driveway that takes you all the way back to the leased area. You have a 100 by 100 foot leased area, but within that leased space is a 50 by 50 foot area that has a fence that goes around it, and it's within this smaller area where the monopole will be located and then any necessary equipment, support equipment. And here's a closer look so you can see the driveway comes up, leased area, and then this is the 50 by 50-foot fenced-in area with the tower in the middle, and then locations for support equipment just within that leased area, or within the fenced area. Again, we're talking about a monopole. A monopole typically is 200 feet or less, and it is does not have any guide wires or support structure to it. It is a single monopole. Here is our monopole. As you've heard, we're proposing 155 feet. At the top, it has a 1-foot lightning antenna. It is set up to have 4 different carriers. The first carrier for this particular site would be AT&T, and again, we have room for 4 more. Down around the base is a proposed 6-foot chain link fence. On the top of that, you have 3 strands of barbed wire. That said, the telecommunications standards, as I indicated, in order for the telecommunications tower to go forward, we would also need in the future a special use permit. What you have in front of you on the screen are the requirements for a telecommunications tower as part of the special use permit process. I will represent to all of you that our application contains supporting materials and documents that meet each of those criteria. I'm not here tonight to go through those with you, but I did want to make you aware of that. The criteria for conditional rezoning is in the UDO at 2.17.9. There are 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 factors that you all are to consider, and I'd like to quickly review those 8 with you. The first is that the proposed condition, in this case a telecommunications tower, is consistent with the adopted comprehensive plan. I have identified for you multiple specific provisions, policies in the comprehensive plan that this tower facilitates. Generally speaking, one of the biggest benefits to the Southern Pines community is that it provides an essential service, reliable broadband service. That is going to benefit your businesses, your residents, fire, safety, or public fire police, and first responders, as well as schools in the community. It will help drive economic development, especially as your community continues to grow. It will also facilitate the utilization of town services and facilitate the implementation of a smart city technologies. Again, all identified policy goals set forth in your comprehensive plan. Now, just as that represents growth and providing services to your constituents and the community, one of the other goals set forth in the comprehensive plan is maintaining the character of the community, and in particular, this area. And so what I'd like to show you up here is that the total property, or the total property is approximately 4.24 acres. The vet clinic and the parking for the vet clinic right here is 0.34 acres. The driveway coming back to the site is 0.22 acres, and then the fenced-in area is 0.06 acres. So looking at all that, you have approximately, out of this entire tract, an impervious surface of only about 15%. Or, stated the other way, you have 85% remaining of natural area or space that can be used as or deemed open space or green space. Another goal of the comprehensive plan. Another consideration is the lack of impact on adjoining properties. A telecommunications tower is a light or low-scale commercial use. It has little to no impact on immediately adjacent properties. There's no lighting, there's no noise, there are no odors. You have, for this project, or this site, I believe, biannual site visits for maintenance purposes. In addition, what we have prepared and submitted as part of our application process is a impact analysis that was prepared by Mr. Berkowitz. He's a North Carolina real estate appraiser. He is here this evening to answer any questions that you might have about that, but I've provided you with his conclusion, and that is very simply that the monopool will not have any negative impact on immediately adjacent properties from a real estate or sales perspective.
Can I interrupt you 1 second?
Absolutely.
I have a question for BJ. So tonight, what we're looking at is just adding conditional zoning to this district.
This is presently a general business conditional zoning district. It would remain a general business conditional zoning district, but the conditions of the conditional district would be changed to add towers above 50 feet as a use within this district.
And then that use would be established through a special use permit? Correct. And so that is another process. That's a quasi-judicial hearing.
Yes, that is correct. I could expand on that substantially after a bunch of conversations we've had and a bunch of thought processes, but I will not at this point. I will just say, yes, we've determined that's the best path. We actually,
So how specific should we be on this discussion about this?
expand on your question a little bit more, what you mean by it, just so I make sure to
So
get
the
it right.
special use permit is established through a quasi-judicial hearing. And so this is getting a little bit more specific, I think, about this particular use, rather than just the use.
Yes, adding it as a use within this particular conditional zoning district, which is unique, and right now only allows for a veterinary clinic.
Right.
If you think of it from the point of view of, if you go back 20 years, the town council said only a veterinary clinic here. That's it. So they couldn't come in and request a special use permit because this particular unique district only allows for veterinary clinics. So now they come in and say, we want to add towers above 50 feet. But in order to add towers above 50 feet, you have to meet all the standards for a conditional zoning district. So they've done that. The site plan, what the use is, and those details. But yes, staff had a pretty significant period of research on this, and probably would have been a toss-up about whether you could end it here
Right.
or do a special use permit, and the applicants chose, they said, we'd rather go with the belt and suspenders approach and do the special use permit as well. We consulted with the town attorney on that and had a fair bit of discussion about it. So if either the town attorney or the applicant's attorney want to weigh in on that, obviously, please feel free.
So I think the root of your question is that the quasi-judicial hearing is going to be much more in-depth, so we're going to hear all of it again, correct?
Well, I think my question is, should we even hear it at all at this point in time, specific to this site?
Yes, you should. For a conditional zoning district, the level of detail that he's providing is appropriate because you are rezoning it from one zoning that only allows veterinary clinic to a zoning that allows for the cell tower. And we would lock in site-specific details with any conditional zoning district. So it is redundant, and that's why we determined it was probably unnecessary to do both. Technically, it may, I'm choosing my line, it may be unnecessary to do both, but we left it to the applicants to choose. It's probably safer, technically speaking, to do the special use permit as well to make sure, and they chose that path. So we were trying not to avoid that redundancy. We were trying to avoid that redundancy, but this is what it served up because we have a very unique situation where we have a 20-year-old conditional zoning district, and this was the only property that worked in this area. Had it been a multitude of other properties, we would have skipped a number of these steps. So,
Our attorney looks like he wants to say something.
The short answer to your question is that it's a two-step process, and all you need to decide tonight is whether or not a cell tower of some description would be appropriate at that location. The second phase will be, is this specific tower appropriate at that location?
Thank you for that clarification.
Thank you.
So my question is probably for BJ, but I'm really not clear who my question is for. With the proposed verbiage that you put in here, it talks about a monopole tower, and there was a time 6 weeks ago when I felt like I sort of had a grip on the different kinds of towers. Does this limit it? I don't think your language limits specifically to a monopole, so there's nothing to stop, and maybe that's a question for the applicant to stop it from getting approval as far as the height and then putting in the more intrusive tower, which you're going to remind me what it's called.
The lattice towers and the
Yes.
towers with the guide wires.
Yes. So I'm interested in, if we approve it, is there a way to approve it? And I'm trying to think 30 years out.
Yeah, staff's opinion on that would be that the site plan specifies 155-foot monopole. Their zoning will be for a 155-foot monopole with a 1-foot highest appurtenance,
Right.
yeah, so if they came in with a lattice tower, we would say that's not, we distinguish between those in the UDO, so we would not, it would have to be a monopole.
Okay, and are you comfortable with the language that you've proposed that says, considering that the proposed monopole is a low-density commercial use, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, are you convinced that that is airtight as far as someone not coming in behind this hearing and saying lattice pole or pole with the wires that go to the next county?
Yes, I am.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, the applicant would like to respond to that if you're.
Yeah, and I'm a fan of reliable broadband, I get that, and I'm also a fan of having had calls dropped out in that area. I understand that this would serve the community well. The other thing, though, that we've talked about before, and I'm interested in just a review, and consider this just that you're talking to a fifth grader here. I know that everybody's gone through the steps to talk about the impact on the airport and whether or not there's any sense of any concern we should have, is there any concern we should have there in regard to safety?
I'm going to let the applicant answer that, and
Okay,
apparently
looks like
Mac
the
as well.
attorney is
But
volunteering to answer that.
I would like to add that in the process of rezoning from a conditional zoning district that only allows a veterinary clinic to one that allows a 155-foot monopole with a 1-foot antenna on the top, any questions like this are appropriate for the public body to determine if allowing this use in this location is a good idea or not. So
Right.
these details are germane, I believe.
I think it's germane, and I think it's kind of nice to give people notice that that's a concern I have. Yes,
It is germane, and it's better in the special use permit hearing than this hearing.
right. And I think that would be of public interest also. So that concerns me, and particularly as the airport thinks about putting in commercial flights in and out of our fine community post-US Open, yeah. Which I love having a flight out of here.
I had a big picture question. So I know when we spoke to you before and we looked at the rules, was what, 750 feet? It can't be within 750 feet of the.
800 feet. Was the text amendment?
Yes.
Yes.
So you've identified that this property meets that standard. I understand the benefit of, cell and telecommunications. So if it's to move forward, when constructed, it's going to meet the 750-foot standard. After that's established, and when it's created, it doesn't, but after the fact, if somebody's like, I like that spot, I want to build a house 1 foot from the property line, what happens moving forward? Because there's a lot of undeveloped land in and around that. Does the 750 feet just mean when established, and then what happens afterwards may be closer than that? But then it's up to the person where there's already a tower?
Yeah, a new house, a new detached single-family residential use. First of all, if we're talking about the subject property, it's a conditional zoning district, and only the cell tower and the veterinary clinic are allowed on there. But I think what you're referring to.
But it has to meet that standard if in the SUP, the use is created
Yeah.
and they put it in, they have to meet the 750 feet and show us, sorry.
The
That
800
it's-
feet.
There's no house within this number of feet.
Correct.
Okay.
Then I think what you're asking is if, say you go 800 feet straight west on the other side of Wayner Road, somebody decides they want to build a house
Within that buffer.
within
yes.
that buffer. It's not a standard that you have to be within a certain distance of a cell, you have to be more than a certain distance from a cell tower to build a house. The standard is you have to be more than a certain distance from a house to build a cell tower.
When you build
So
it.
when they build it, as long as it's 800 feet, they're fine.
Okay, thank you.
I was curious about whether or not anyone from the veterinarian clinic had anything to say. There's still a veterinary clinic there, am I right? What's their take on all of this?
We sent property notification to both the subject property, because the veterinary clinic is a lessee on property owned by the same landowner that the current Tower Co. are dealing with. It's one piece of property. They are leasing the veterinary clinic. We checked on this.
We are leasing from the property, excuse me, from the property owner who also has a lease with the vet clinic. So we're not leasing from the vet clinic. We are leasing from the owner of the parent
So the
tract.
vet clinic does not own the land upon which it sits.
That is correct.
Back.
Say so.
Yeah, did we hear back from the vet clinic if they had any issues or concern with it?
And they did not have any issues or concerns with it. We also sent adjacent property notification to all properties within 200 feet about this public hearing and the planning board public hearing.
So, Mr. Tucker, are you able to give us any enlightenment in regard to negotiations with or communications with the airport?
Yes, I can.
Okay,
And
excellent.
so let me, if I can, I'm going to
I'd
take
love for you to follow your timeline.
to
I'll
take
stop asking.
one step back, and it goes to the level of detail that I'm going into regarding this specific site. And as you've heard, the way that I view this process is that our site plan is the only use that can be used. So our site plan essentially becomes part of the conditional zoning. Those are the restrictions placed on the property, such that you couldn't, for example, come in and put a 500-foot lattice or, a lattice tower in or something to that effect.
And having that be a monopole tower is something that you would stipulate to and agree to as a condition?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely. To your follow-up question about, and I'm going to have a slide that I get to this in just a moment, and we have an individual here tonight who can answer any more in-depth questions. But yes, as part of this process, we do get an FAA certification letter that we do not interfere with the Moore County Airport, which is obviously right down the
Right,
road. So, and that is something that is also presented as part of the requirements that's actually one of the requirements for a special use permit for a telecommunications tower, is to submit evidence of that compliance. And we have done so as part of our application packet.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. One of the additional considerations is whether the proposed tower meets objectives and policies of the comprehensive plan and the UDO. Not to reiterate what I've already said, but the answer to that is a resounding yes, for the reasons that I've indicated about providing reliable broadband service, providing that service to your businesses, residents, first responders. And again, we are preserving, it is a low-impact use. As you saw with my site plan, we are preserving 85% roughly of the open space on the parent track. And again, it is a low-scale commercial use that has no noise, no odors, no lighting on it, biannual.
Well, and refresh my memory about one other thing. I think that I remember from my original class in towers, which was also led by you all, that if it were, God forbid, if it were to collapse, it would collapse onto itself, not falling off into, toward the vet clinic or any other thing.
That is correct.
Correct?
Yes.
Okay.
And actually, well, my next slide actually addresses that, and we have a gentleman here this evening that if you have more questions about exactly that mechanism, we're happy to answer those for you this evening.
I do, since you just asked it, when it falls on itself, the amount of space it ends up taking up, since it's a 50 by 50. I mean, I know that we're now 800 feet from a home, and I don't know how far from the vet clinic, which I do want to know, but is it going to fall within that 50 by 50?
Yes.
Okay.
And yes.
Okay.
Even in a hurricane that we're prone to have.
We have had them.
Gentlemen up here to
Yes.
answer these
Yeah.
questions for you.
Yeah, so we can get
So
there.
introduce yourself.
So my name is Avery Fan. I'm a licensed structural engineer. Work for Kimley Horn. I've been in the telecom business since 2008. So very common for this application where we're developing cell towers to have something called a fall zone. radius. And so effectively what we're doing is when the tower is designed, there's a weak point. And so we target the weak point on the structure to be higher off the ground so that when, God forbid, a disaster happens and it were to fall over, we can control how far that falls. And so for this particular site, it's intended to be 50 feet from the top of the tower. During a design wind event, I mean, we've got load factors, we've got all kinds of things that are protect us. And many times when you see disaster footage after a hurricane, the cell phone towers hanging out in the background doing just fine. And so they're very resilient. They're not designed to fail, but when we design them, we do take that into consideration for where we can put basically that weak point on the structure. So for this one, it is 50 feet from the top.
Thank you.
Okay. One of the other, I've already talked about the slides up here regarding the coverages. It's going to provide enhanced coverage for this area of Southern Pines. Another consideration, again, is the general welfare and to protect and preserve the character of the area. You've already heard me talk about that it's an unmanned facility, and the minimal impact that it does have on the area. We also will meet all federal and state emissions standards. We do comply with FAA requirements, and as you've already heard, in the event of a failure, an unlikely failure, it is designed to break approximately 50 feet from the top and fall on itself and stay within that fenced-in area. In our application packets, we do have a signed and sealed letter from a structural engineer supporting that position.
It's meant to fall within 50 feet, and the fence is 50 feet. It's going to fall on the fence, right? I mean, is there a reason that you're leasing a 100 by 100? Is there a reason that the fence is just at that 50-foot mark?
So to your point, yes, it would fall 50 feet linearly from where it hinges, which would put us outside of the 50 by 50 lease. It would stay with, sorry, the fence. It would stay within the 100 by 100 lease area, however. As far
Oh, yeah,
as
because
the
you're
size.
25 feet from the
That's
fence on
right,
the other
because
side.
we're putting the
Yeah.
monopole in the middle because that's the most efficient
Yep.
for when we get AT&T or Verizon, another carrier on there, we can put their equipment ancillary in the corners of the fence and allow everyone access to the tower. So that's the traditional setup.
And if it falls, who repairs it and how quickly?
We fix
You want me to take this one? So for TowerCo specifically, my company, we do a lot of monitoring of their systems following storms and such to alert them that, hey, there was a storm in the area. So we're very proactive, but many times the carriers actually know about it almost instantly because the coverage goes down and they get an alert. But even if, let's say, the tower did not come down, we're coming behind the storm to do a visual inspection to identify any damage that occurred during the storm.
Okay. Thank you.
So one thing I do want to talk about, a benefit, you've heard me talk about how this tower will provide and enhance, the community by providing the broadband service specifically for fire and fire, police, and first responders. I want to take 1 second, though, to talk about FirstNet, and that this is a designated FirstNet site. And so what FirstNet is after 9/11, Congress authorized the establishment of a first responder network in the event of emergencies. And so the FirstNet has partnered with AT&T to establish this network across the country. And so this site, or this monopole tower, is a FirstNet tower. I will represent to you that it's my understanding that in Southern Pines, you already have over 200 subscribers to the FirstNet service. And what that essentially does is it's a designated frequency to be used only by first responders in an emergency. So like if you're at a crowded event or in a traffic jam and you go to use your cell phone, it often gets bogged down because everybody else is using it. This eliminates that for your first responders. They get a special device, and then they have uninterrupted service. Yes, sir.
That sounds great to me, but for purposes of the rezoning, this isn't something that would be conditional to the rezoning. I know if you do it as you intend, it's going to be first net, but once we do the rezoning, if somebody comes in right behind you, we can't tag this as a condition to the rezone like the site plan. Is that correct?
That's correct.
I think that's correct. The reason I'm sharing this with you is because it goes to the public benefit and protecting the public safety as part, which is a condition as part of the rezoning. Again, there are additional catch-all provisions that you all can consider as part of our rezoning request. I'm not going to go through what I've already said regarding the benefits on the community, other than to simply say is that it does provide a much-needed service to your community, and it will be an asset. And I've already talked about the site, so I'm not going to reiterate that. And again, the ordinance provides for some of these catch-all categories, but again, all I will do is rely upon my previous comments regarding the overall benefit to the community. That said, I don't have anything further to add. I'm happy, or we're happy to answer any questions, but thank you for your time. Thank you for your questions. We would ask that you support our rezoning request and approve our application.
Thank you.
We'll have additional questions. Okay, I do have one for staff, but you go ahead.
Please go ahead.
Director Grieve, oh, if I didn't forget it. Oh, so if we are approving the conditional zone for this piece of property tonight, and they change their mind, does that mean that someone else can come along and just put a tower there that's a monopole? Or would someone else also have to go through the special use permit?
Zoning travels with the property, and our office would consider this property zoned for a 156-foot tall monopole in the location and as set forth on the site plan. And the question of whether or not they would need to go through the special use permit, if they came in and said, we don't want to, we would look at it as zoned for a 156-foot tall monopole as set forth on the site plan.
So the next person who comes along does not need a special use permit?
Man,
I know, well, because if not, then why are we having them do it? I mean.
they're choosing to.
Okay.
They're choosing to as a belt and suspenders approach, without a
Okay.
doubt.
But if we approve it, there's a chance that somebody else can come along when they change their mind, which they're not going to, but if they did, someone else could come along and just put one there.
I just want to say one more thing. So it's this use, though, in the table of uses is a conditional use anyway, right?
It is a special use in the table of uses, yes, that's correct.
But it's already conditionally zoned for just the vet clinic.
You're rezoning it to allow a 156-foot tall monopole, which, this is just a question that we looked far and wide for some clear guidance on this, and this is just kind of an area that it's unclear. You are zoning it for that monopole. However, in that zone, in the UDO, it is a special use. So we put to the applicant, look, we don't think there's going to be an issue one way or the other because it's going through a public hearing. It is being legislatively decided that it is an appropriate use on that property. I mean, I'd be interested to hear Mac's take on this because I'm sensing we have just a small difference in terms of if you put all these details in the conditional zoning district application, you are locked into only that. That's kind of the point. It may not be appropriate to just zone it for a cell tower, but to zone it for a 156-foot tall monopole with the 100 by 100 location as depicted on the site plan makes it acceptable to us. And that's the point of a conditional zoning district. That's why you're doing it, because any other way it may not be acceptable. And that's why you're locked in on that zoning. I would love for the applicant to share what he shared with me on the phone about why they choose to go the belt and suspenders approach on this, because he also did a lot of very thorough research on that issue on behalf of his client.
I got one question about the belt and suspenders analogy. What does that mean?
You don't need them both to hold your pants up.
Yeah, double.
What?
You don't need them both to hold your pants up.
Locked in.
fourth grade picture taken, and I was wearing both a belt and suspenders. And what that did is it ensured that my pants would stay up. If one mechanism failed, the other would be there as a redundancy, a sartorial redundancy, you might say.
Permanent nerd status too. Bless your heart.
And I puffed up my chest because I thought I was really small.
Our applicant's response to that? I would like to hear from our attorney.
I'll take his answer first.
Okay.
All right. So, and Mr. Grieve and I have had multiple conversations about this. And as you've heard, and I agree, that as part of the conditional zoning process, you are literally approving only our project, only the tower that you see in the site plan. And in my mind, that literally becomes part of your zoning map. Like, that is the only thing that can be used. Now, if the cell tower didn't require a special use permit in your ordinance, then I would tell you that after tonight, we're done. Because that,
But would it if it's conditionally zoned?
if it's conditionally zoned, and the only condition that you're approving as part of this process is our cell tower, and your UDO did not provide for a special use permit process, then I think we're done tonight. But because it also requires a special use permit, that was the wrinkle that gets thrown into all.
So a special use permit is required in general business for a cell phone tower.
That is
This is not
correct.
going to be general business. It's going to be general business CZ.
It-
I'm happy to hear you out, Attorney McCarley, but I don't like the redundancy of going through things twice.
Mr. Grieve and I had long conversations about this and realized that this is a unique situation. You would not normally have a conditional use zone and an underlying zone that required a special use permit. And rather than us make a decision about what kind of risk the applicant was willing to take, we put it to the applicant to say, do you want to do this in one step or two? If you do it in one, there's a legal vulnerability because the ordinance says a special use permit's required.
It's in GB.
That's the underlying district.
What about the ordinance in GBCZ?
There's nothing in the ordinance that specifically answers that question, leaving a question. And the applicant chose the safest route possible, which is.
Why would we have CZ if then we have to go through SUP? I mean, this is what we did last year to try to get rid of SUP is code CZ. And if this is going to happen over and over, I feel like it's.
not. This is an this is a one-off thing because you happen to have somebody that can do a use that's only a special use in a zone that's already zoned conditional zoning.
The microphone.
And that's extraordinarily unique. That's the premise we keep going back to is, oh man, it had to be that the first one out of the gate with conditional zoning had to be like the most.
And it would be wonderful to be able to issue a special use permit as part of this process, but that's a QJ proceeding, so they don't go well together.
That's the premise of the question that I asked a while ago was.
Never see this case again.
It's all right.
We will see you again.
But I will tell you this, that we have started the special use permit process. But I will tell you that, I will represent after speaking with Mr. Hockey here from TowerCo, is that we agree that there is redundancy, and if we can avoid that, then we are happy to accommodate the town. So in other words, if there's an agreement that this is approved and that we can go forward after this evening and we don't need to do the special use permit, then we will avoid coming back here.
But I think it's also important from your standpoint to protect your vulnerability.
Staff, please explain the vulnerability with a conditional zone in a GB.
There are two rules that apply to this particular site. One rule says this application is adequate by itself. The other rule says you have to have a special use permit. Two rules for the same site.
Right.
And that the vulnerability is if you only follow one of those,
That sounds like it's our fault, not theirs.
it's nobody's
To roll.
fault. It's simply getting caught in an
Right.
old special use, an old conditional use zone.
Right.
And the easiest way to fix it was to do the conditional use zone amendment and the special use permit.
Do you see, and this is a question for you, do you see a way to streamline the next hearing to benefit both the applicant and the council?
Would you be willing to submit a full written record of what you think needs to be submitted to the council and let them rule on a record instead of sitting through a long hearing?
So, two comments. The answer to that first is yes, and anticipating that you all may not want to hear from me again is.
Love to hear from you. We really do.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that. And one way that I've handled that in the past, because you do have to create a quote record, an evidentiary record, is that for each of the individuals that I've brought with me tonight, rather than calling them to testify, is that they sign affidavits. I present that to you, and you accept that into the record, and then we can rely upon that as the evidentiary record. That's one way to streamline it.
So do we need to have, do we need to agree and have a vote on whether or not we would accept affidavits in this particular case? You're fine with that legally?
We're all nodding yes, that would be fine with you. Let me just say,
Staying until midnight, but, and you're doing a great job. but
let me
we've
add
heard it now.
one simple statement, and that is, if I were representing the cell tower company, I would want to have the belt suspenders.
Right, it makes sense. It makes perfect sense because you don't want to fly with the vulnerability. So legally, that makes sense, but there is no legal drawback to them if they present a record of evidence with affidavits, and we accept that.
Acceptable.
Okay,
It's been several years, and I can't remember, but I distinctly remember doing a QJ where the only speaker was staff.
Right.
Nobody objected to public hearing. I don't even think the applicant was there. I can't remember, but it's been a while, but we've done it.
Why don't we pause, since it is a public hearing, why don't we hear from the public? And then if the council has an opportunity to ask your guests, the applicant's guests, questions before we discuss and vote. Does that sound okay?
Could I ask or bring up one other item while he's present? And thank you for the presentation. And I'll just verify the town, and Chief Cameron already walked out, but we are on FirstNet, and all of our emergency police, fire, they all use the AT&T FirstNet. So coverage in this area is definitely a challenge, I will say that. But again, that's not, as Councilman Pate pointed out, not what you're really ruling on this evening. The small curveball I wanted to throw out there, and I don't think there's probably an easy answer to this because of the scenario where it's a separate landowner and two leased users. As was stated, this conditional district was granted in 2004, and it makes perfect sense that it's part of the ETJ, because in 2004, the town limits did not extend out that far along NC 22. However, around 2005 or 6, the Wayner Road residential area that now surrounds the backside of this property was all annexed into town. There was CDBG water and sewer run, a lot went on. So this property has the potential to turn into the inevitable donut hole of ETJ, or if ETJ goes away, we're actually going through all of this process only for it to end up with county zoning one day. It would be nice to get it annexed while things are kind of open and being discussed, but again, I understand you and your client don't really have that authority as a simple land lease. So I throw that out there for consideration because it's a topic that we often talk about. It may be something you can speak with your landlord about, but this is a property that is currently not inside the town limits of Southern Pines. And that does impact, arguably one way or another, some of the statements around economic development and different things. And I know that can be argued on all sides, but it is a property that lies outside of the town right now. That's it.
so is anyone from Sullivan, representing Sullivan, the landowner, present this evening? Okay. Interesting. Mr. Tucker, did you feel like you got to say everything you wanted to say? We asked you, we peppered you with a lot of questions.
I did, yes.
Okay, great, thank you.
I think we'll give the public an opportunity to speak. Is there anyone here who would like to comment on this hearing? Okay, seeing none. Council, do you have questions for the applicant or staff?
Further questions?
My thought is that if we move forward this evening approving the rezoning, that it is everyone's intention to also approve a quasi judicial hearing as well. Okay.
A
So you guys are-
quasi judicial
Well, the-
written
Yes,
record
yeah.
that contains evidence and affidavits from the relevant.
So everyone is okay with the process?
Yes, I can
And
commit to
I'm a
that.
little bit worried about the language that the staff has presented, and Mr. Grieve is trying to make me feel really good about that, but I'd like for it to be very specific about the 156-foot monopole, just to make sure that we're good on that. That's-
It's in that site plan, correct? Like the,
Right, I think we're okay, but again, vulnerabilities, we're all about that this evening, so let's protect ours too.
And will be in both this approval
I mean,
and the
the
SUP.
understanding, we approve this, they never show up again with their SUP, whether it's in person or virtual. The next company.
Virtual at all.
No, I'm saying the next company, if it's not them, has to do a 156-foot pole or less, but they couldn't do anything more than that by what we would be approving tonight.
Yeah, those are the conditions of the conditional zoning
Right.
district that make this use and this change appropriate. Otherwise, if it wasn't for those stipulations or those specific circumstances as applied as conditions, as written in the staff report and attached in a site plan, et cetera, it wouldn't be. So to get back to your question, Councilwoman Peterson, yes, staff is very comfortable that this site plan would lock it in. We would pull this out, 6 months from now, for some reason this project goes away, 6 months from now, somebody comes along and says, hey, we heard we could do a tower here. We would pull this out, we'd say, only if you do it exactly like this. And they may choose to go with that or they may not. Next issue would be, if I may request a 2 to 5 minute recess for some deliberation between our town attorney, the applicant's attorney, to talk about this issue of the special use permit and what alternatives might be available to the town council to insert language into this approval that may increase their comfort adequately that a special use permit may not be required. Because he just threw out an idea that I don't want to try to respond to on the fly, but we could probably, if we just take a 5 minute recess, we could probably work something out.
Okay, why don't we go ahead and make it,
5-minute recess, make a motion.
we'll come back in 8 minutes at 7:10.
That's a lot of fun.
All right, I'm going to bring the meeting back to order. Has staff had adequate time to speak with the applicant?
Mayor, and we believe we have a solution that you'll like.
All right.
Present that solution.
By stipulating as one of the conditions of approval that a cell tower, as depicted on site plans submitted with the file, is a by right use on the subject property, as opposed to just saying it's a permitted use or that the use is allowed, it is more clear that the town council's intention is that this not require a special use permit, because by right uses are allowed by right. And so they're allowed by right, however stipulated with all of the restrictions in the submitted materials for the conditional zoning district. That, you might say, takes the toggle switch further towards abundant clarity that no further special use permit is required. So believe it or not, by simply changing, if you, on page of the packet, the meeting packet, it's page 21 of 190. On the staff report, it's page 8 of 10. There are two conditions, and I think it's as simple as replacing the word permitted with by right to make abundantly clear that, because that phrase comes directly out of the UDO and means if you're a by right use, you're not a special use. So I think by simply stipulating by right, so the condition would read as follows, subject to any further input by the applicants or town attorney. By right uses are restricted to veterinary clinic with no outside kennels and wireless telecommunications towers and antennas taller than 50 feet, as depicted on site plans submitted with file Z0504, which is the veterinary clinic file, and Z0124 respectively. It's locked in.
Will we need to make any changes to the motions?
No, ma'am. The motion is still regarding reasonableness of the use and consistency with the comprehensive plan. And then the second one, which is to approve Z0124 as submitted and as set forth in attachments to staff report Z0124, you may wish to add to that and as modified at the hearing, and with the conditions as modified at the hearing.
Thank you. All right, since this is a last minute change, I'd like to hear from council on how you feel about the process again.
I'm okay with it.
It's fine.
I was waiting to hear from council, not council, but yeah, sorry. My bad. I'm waiting for Mac to tell me what he thinks, and
Applicant is fine with it. There is the tiniest amount of risk left, but the applicant is comfortable with that. And I can't cite you any case law that says this isn't a good answer.
Okay. Mr. Tucker, would you like to introduce everyone who is here to present, just so that if we have any questions, we will know who to ask?
All right, I'll just ask them to stand up and introduce themselves, and we can start with David.
David Hockey, I'm with
Oh.
Tower.
wait.
Sorry.
Make sure that our YouTube viewers can hear you.
David Hockey, I'm with Towerco, the applicant, and my title is Director of Business Development, and I also work in concert with the zoning groups that handle these types of processes.
My name is Michael Berkowitz. I'm a certified general appraiser, and I perform the impact study.
My name is Avery Fan. I'm a licensed professional engineer in the state of North Carolina. I work for Kimley Horn and Associates.
I'm Tim Sutton. I'm with AT&T on the site acquisition side, and I can answer questions about FirstNet if necessary.
Good evening. I'm Shohal Chaudhary. I'm with AT&T RAN design, radio frequency side, working for AT&T for 15 years. So any questions you might have?
Thank you.
Thank you.
I actually do have a question for Mr. Sutton. If the power were off, does FirstNet still work?
I believe we have generators lined up for this site. Diesel generators is usually what we have.
Okay.
So it'll run for a period of time, and then we also then replenish the fuel at the site.
Okay, thank you. All right, do the council members sitting up here have any other questions?
No, but compliments to you, Mr. Tucker, on a presentation well done.
Thank you.
All right, is there a motion?
All right.
I will move that after reviewing the proposed rezoning and the criteria for consideration of zoning amendments, and after considering the comments received at the Town Council's public hearing tonight and the Planning Board's written recommendation, that the proposed amendment to the Town of Southern Pines zoning map is reasonable in the public interest and consistent with the current character of the Wayner Road neighborhood and the criteria set forth in the Town of Southern Pines UDO, Section 2.17.9. Considering that the proposed monopole is low intensity commercial land use that will expand cellular coverage in the area and which will benefit the public, business, and emergency response teams. The general framework map, the conservation and development map, the character district map categorizes the subject parcel as an area to preserve and rural living respectively, which is consistent with the rezoning request. Therefore, the requested rezoning to amend conditions on an existing GBCD is a reasonable request for the reasons mentioned above and within the staff report for application Z01-24.
Is there a second?
Is this the one where we want to add with conditions as modified during this hearing?
We'll add that.
That'll be the next one.
All right, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed?
I forgot to say it.
Okay, so it was an aye. All right, seeing none opposed, that motion carries.
Great. Now therefore, I will move to approve Z01-24 as submitted and set forth in the attachments to the staff report Z01-24 to include the conditions as modified in the hearing tonight and referenced by Planning Director Grieve.
Second.
All in favor, vote by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you guys so much for your presentation and your time this evening.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, moving on to action items, we have AR-01-24, the Phoenix Village multifamily apartment buildings.
Good evening, members of council. BJ Grieve with the Town of Southern Pines Planning Department, here to present on behalf of staff the continuance of the architectural compliance permit request for Phoenix Village, 4 multifamily buildings. You may recall from last month, this application was presented by my colleague, Elena Millette. She did present an application for one 63,000 square foot multifamily residential building with 26 dwelling units and 3 additional 16,000 square foot multifamily residential units with 6 dwelling units each. I am not going to redo her presentation or redo all of the details. What I am going to do is talk about what has been modified and resolved between the last hearing and this one. And our team, Elena, did work a lot with the applicants to resolve some of the outstanding issues. With regard to foundation plantings, the requirement for foundation plantings has now been worked into one condition of approval. The applicant is okay with the foundation plantings pursuant to the multifamily development requirements in the UDO. There is a requirement for the variation in building color between the proposed Weymouth Glen and the existing Wharton and Parkview apartment buildings. My understanding is the town council 1 month ago did say that they were okay with the color changes and therefore condition number 3 could be eliminated. That is now part of deviation number 4, that is granted. Furthermore, the applicant ultimately requested less dense landscaping of the garage bays based on resident safety concerns, considering that Grove Villas face the private road East Main Avenue. That has been worked into deviation number 2 to grant that reduction in the landscape buffer. However, the applicants have worked with staff to have an appropriate amount of landscape buffering between the buildings, the parking, and the East Main Avenue. We struck a balance between that, and it's depicted on a landscaping plan that was submitted with the application and that was submitted since last meeting and is in your packet. And that's worked into, as I said, deviation number 2. Furthermore, regarding building articulation, we'd be here the rest of the night if I went into all the details of the building articulation on these. So I can say that they have worked it out so that deviation number 5 covers the required building articulation. There is a deviation being granted to reduce the building articulation, but because of other architectural elements and color changes, staff was okay with the modification. Finally, there is one detail. The other deviations 1 and 3 were left over from last time. And finally, I did notice as I was preparing for the meeting this evening that one small issue slipped through. On page 7 of 8 of the staff report, and page 110 of 190 of the packet. I give both those. Hopefully that's helpful for those who are looking at one or the other.
The packet numbers might be off because I think the packet got longer. It's 199 pages. So it's 119 of 199.
Got it. Okay, so page 110 it would still be, unless the page that were added were prior to.
It's, for some reason, it's
Oh,
119
it's
now.
on 119. So there were 9 pages added. I'll try to remember that the rest of the night. I'll add 9 to
Don't
whatever.
worry
and see
about
if I
it.
can't, yeah. Okay, deviation number 3 on that page references, the second to last line references condition 1 will require. That is a vestige to what was condition number 1 when this came to you in June. It would be accurate if you just strike the word condition 1 will require, the 4 words condition 1 will require. So it would read, in the rear of each building and screening, add the word will be planted along East Main Avenue. That'll tidy up that issue. And if the applicants wish to speak to that. But again, that's a vestige reference to when condition 1 had to do with the landscaping requirements that have been modified. With that, everything that was from the packet last month was attached with a link in the current staff report. So everything was there available to the public if they just came on board for this project here, for this review here. And it's not a public hearing, but just in case anybody's playing along at home. And that is all from staff. Other than that, it's ready to, we recommend approval with the 5 deviations and the 1 condition as modified. And I believe if the applicants are wish to speak, that's certainly a good thing. Yeah, no problem. Thank you.
Or would the applicant like to speak?
I really have nothing more to add. We did provide greater articulation on the elevations requested. And as he mentioned, the landscaping has been incorporated along East Main to soften the appearance of those garage doors. One question I wanted to ask, the revision you just recommended for deviation 3, you kept the word screening, but didn't we technically change it to buffering as opposed to screening? Didn't we follow the buffering guidelines in the UDO as opposed to screening guidelines?
Yes.
Okay,
I would change that to buffering.
okay,
Good catch. Thank you.
yep. So that's all that I have, unless you have questions from us.
I think the buildings look much better with the
Thanks
articulation
for
and the color
all your
changing.
efforts, and appreciate it.
It's been a good process. I think in the end, we got a better result out of the process, so thank you.
Are there other questions for the applicant? Okay,
Have a good evening.
thank you, too. Is council ready to make a motion?
Yes, I'll make a motion to approve AR-01-24 with the 5 deviations and 1 condition as written in the July 9th, 2024 staff report, also to include the additional changes to deviation 3 in reference to prior condition 1 and buffering screening issues.
Is that sufficient?
I'll give you what you need.
By saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, guys. Item 7B, AR-07-24, Pinnacle Storage, Southern Pines, Phase 2. And I think we have Director Grieve. Coming up again. When he's ready.
It's the BJ Grief Show, remember?
But you remember I warned you.
Sorry.
What was your original number, 129?
Yeah, it's staff report. I thought it was so prepared having those page numbers. That would work right there. If you leave it right there on that drone shot, that'll work. Thank you. Hi there. BJ Grieve with the Town of Southern Pines Planning Department, here to present to you architectural compliance permit number AR-07-24. This is for the second phase of a project that already exists, that most folks are already familiar with, over in what we refer to as the Pine Dean area, but the area that is bordered by Old US 1, Bell Avenue, Shaw Avenue, Old US 1 and South Bennett. Here's Old US 1 over here, South Bennett right here, Bell Avenue on this side, and over here is Shaw Avenue. And throughout this presentation and the applicant's presentation, it is essentially a rectangle. And on this end is Old US 1, Bell Avenue, Shaw Avenue, and then over here is US 1. US 1 is behind some substantial existing vegetation. The applicants have already constructed phase 1 of the Pinnacle development, the Pinnacle storage development. This application is for phase 2, which is a 46,640 square foot, 2-story commercial self-storage building. The project was reviewed by staff, and we identified 3 issues that were outlined in the staff report. The 3 issues are related to, I don't need this anymore. 3 issues are related, we did the standard review under all the 10 standards of 4.10.4. We determined that there was an issue with building segmentation. If you could go to, in the packet, let's see, go 10 pages on from that drone shot, and you're going to get to, in the meeting packet, you're going to get to the applicant's attachments. We want to look at the building elevations. Yeah, if you could zoom out so you can see the full. You should see 4 elevations on one page if you zoom out far enough. There we go. Okay, I'm going to go over to the screen. I'll talk this through. One of the requirements that we had a challenge with is that buildings are required to be segmented such that there is no width greater than 2 times the height. This is the elevation facing Old US Highway 1. The side facing Bell Avenue is this side right here. The side facing Shaw Avenue is this side right here. And the side facing Highway 1, or you might say the back of the property as viewed from Old US 1, is this right here. Now this elevation is segmented. This elevation is not segmented. And long story short, we let the applicants know this was not segmented, it would need to be, and they indicated they did not want to.
This feels very familiar to the hearing that we just completed with PNIC. I mean, it was a similar non-segmented large building with lots of garages, correct? Okay.
They indicated that they would like to ask the town council to not make them segment the building. We said there are other provisions such as the next two that we're going to get to, where there's a provision in the UDO that you can do other things. You can create alternatives. There's also provisions for deviations if a reason is given of why it doesn't want to be done. And in this particular case, we included an email from the applicant in the packet that basically stated they wanted to ask the town council to not do that. Now this does face Old US 1 and would be visible, if you can see from the drone shot, if it's up on the hill, will be visible from Old US 1.
Go back to the drone shot.
Yeah, sorry to have to go back 10 pages like that, but.
Is it in here? Is it in our packet?
Yeah, there it is right there.
Okay.
So one of the things you notice about this is the property slopes up here, and I described this in the staff report. This building right here that faces this direction, if you look at it from the street, this is a bunch of garages and it's not segmented. And the applicant stated, well, that one wasn't segmented, so we don't want to segment this one on the street-facing facade, or the street-facing side of the building. The staff went back and looked at this, and again, I wrote this all into the staff report with a lot of detail, but I'll try to summarize here, and I can go into more detail if we want to. We went back to the original architectural compliance permit for this, and what we found was that this was the only building elevation submitted with the original architectural compliance permit. This second building was never submitted, and staff never caught that on the site plan submitted with the architectural compliance permit, it showed 2 buildings, but we only received elevations for 1. Quite frankly, a staff error, but also an applicant error, because the applicant never submitted the elevations for this. Staff didn't catch the site plan showed 2 buildings, but we only had 1. And so this is a mistake. The fact that isn't segmented is not something that was ever permitted by the town. It got built that way and was not caught. we've already had a good meeting with staff about how that happened. So, but that's water under the bridge at this point. The issue back here is that all faces of the building need to be segmented to comply with the UDO, and in this particular case, it's not. Now, in fairness to the applicant, I'm going to go on with those two things. They just stated that they would prefer to ask town council not to have to segment the building. We indicated that we would not be able to support that, and therefore staff's recommendation, and the applicant also said, well, we will if we have to. So staff's recommendation on this issue is a continuance for the applicant to resubmit materials showing that face be segmented in accordance with the UDO, as is the rear face facing US 1. So that's our recommendation, is a continuance on that issue. Now I'm going to go on to two other issues here. Having a hard time with this. All right, go on to two other issues. There is an issue with brick.
BJ, we paused, sorry, I just want to clarify one thing. When you say street facing, do you mean like facing Old US 1, not Bell Avenue, but like street facing two buildings
Facing Old
deep?
US 1.
Okay,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
still, it's two buildings deep in from
It
Old
is,
US 1.
it is, yep.
Will it be visible?
Now, it doesn't, to be clear,
Okay.
when it comes to segmentation of the building, it's not a requirement that segmentation only be on street-facing facades like it is for other building materials. Segmentation of your building is actually required all the way around, no matter whether it's a street-facing facade or not. The issue of segmentation comes from, it just simply states, in other districts, the width of buildings or building segments shall not be more than twice the building height, period. So it's applicable to all of them.
And because of the elevation change, you believe it will be visible from Old US 1?
Very confident it will be visible from Old US 1 as you look up Bell Avenue.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Now, moving on to the two other things that are deviations. There is one face that is less than 80% brick, not by much. It faces US Highway 1. They're requesting a deviation for that, and the basis for the deviation is because they're barely under 80, and they're facing US 1, which already has buffering there, and actually more planted buffer will be required according, that's why we included a copy of the landscaping plan from the site plan. So even more buffering will be back there. That will not be visible, so therefore being less than 80% brick in that case, staff can support that request for a deviation. There's a good basis for it, and it won't be visible. So we've written that into the staff report. And finally, the ends of the building, the two ends of the building that face Shaw and Bell, these are required actually to have 25% windows between a height of 2 feet and 10 feet. Now, given the nature of the land use, given the nature of the brick that's included here, the percentage of brick that's included, as well as the fact that windows, the only way to practically do window would be some type of a reverse shadow box type of window here. So you would just have the appearance of a window, but then right behind that there would be something. In this particular case, for this land use, there are some land uses, sheets, you'll remember, the shadow box windows were still an important architectural feature to meet our code. These, we just don't think that's necessary to here. We think it's just an unnecessary window to get smashed, quite frankly. However, in exchange for that deviation, we recommended that they add screening, some more landscaping on those ends, because there isn't much landscaping there presently. So we recommended that that deviation be granted, but with some additional screening. The applicant indicated they were okay with that, but they have not yet gotten us a copy of a landscaping plan showing that screening. They were going to get that to us. So where we're at tonight is the staff report sets us up in one of two ways. Continue it so that we can get a copy of the articulated side of the building in accordance. It would basically look the same as the top, the side that faces US 1. We can get a copy of that and we can bring that back to you and make sure it's correct. And also we can get a copy of the landscaping plan. Now, if for any reason, we wanted to be reasonable, and these are not high crimes and misdemeanors here, so we wanted to be reasonable. We did set out a path to an approval with conditions to take care of these issues. Again, the only downside of doing it as a condition is that if they submit to us a revised old US 1 facing side of the building with the articulation, if it's incorrect or if it's different or if they, just based on the interaction, the way it went, if they just submit half of it articulated and say we don't want to do the rest, we just want to, it's just not, we'd prefer that we have that in hand before the approval takes place, so.
Is there landscaping available that buffers all of the garage doors as well? Actually, no, it wouldn't be because it's in the middle of the property.
Yeah, it's in the middle of the property. It faces Old US 1, but there is landscaping on the Shaw Avenue side. There is landscaping on the back of the property facing US 1. The existing landscaping facing Bell Avenue is a little light, and the landscaping on Old US 1 is a little light. Now, when I say a little light, we can pull up pictures. Some of that is because it hasn't matured yet. It's fairly new landscaping, in fairness. But it's not a buffer standard because Old US 1 is not a highway corridor overlay buffering standard. It's basically just street trees, and there's no parking up front. So our landscaping code presently, if you don't have any parking, you just have a building, there's no foundation plantings required. It was pretty much just street trees was the only standard for that landscaping, which, again, we're not taking any issue with that landscaping on Old US 1.
Okay.
In regard to the 73% brick rather than 80%, what is happening instead of the brick? Garage doors? Why the 73? Help me understand that.
You exclude garage doors and windows, and so the 73% probably accounts for some of this material being an ephes mixed in with the brick.
Okay.
You said you do not include the garage doors in the calculation.
Garage doors don't get included. When it says, when it has the building material standards,
Yeah.
it says, the exterior finish of building walls shall be primarily comprised of brick. Cementitious horizontal lap siding, textured concrete masonry, cast stone, and stucco may be used for accents, provided they cover no more than 20% of the exterior walls, exclusive of doors and windows.
So if and I don't know where the rest of the council sits in regard to this, but if our instinct was to require the articulation, require the recommendations that you, as a planning department, thank you, have done. And obviously, I appreciate your acknowledgement that there's a lack of articulation, and that was a matter of something slipping through the cracks, and I appreciate you taking responsibility for that. And I'm saddened that happened that way, and I feel like we've been a little taken advantage of. But there seemed like there would be two paths, and one would be to continue it, and the other would be to deny it. And if we were to do that, what gives your department the most strength? If we deny it, then they've got to go back to Jump Street and start again, the whole thing, right? And comply. But if we continue it, they pay their fee, they need to comply with what you've decided is important, which I agree with. So do you have any recommendation based on, my instinct is to continue or deny? Do you have a recommendation on what I should do?
I would recommend continue with and just give the applicants an indication that what staff said is in fact accurate, and that building segmentation is required by the UDO, and you'd prefer to see that and not grant that
Right.
deviation, because there really isn't a basis for it as yet provided by the applicant.
In this case, I'm really concerned about that and the lack of responding what they knew of in the UDO before with the second building, and the lack of articulation, and the fact that they took advantage of the fact that that fell through the cracks. So that's fine. If that's your recommendation, I appreciate your input, and I will certainly adhere to that.
Yeah, our desire as a staff is to bring projects before you that comply with the standards, or present to you a request for a deviation that makes sense. And we
Right.
have a pretty finely calibrated meter for things that are requests to save money versus requests because they're impractical.
Right.
And we
Right.
try to apply that. Yeah.
And, okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions for Director Grieve, or can we hear from the applicant?
Just real quick. BJ, is there, I don't see it in the packet. If, in fact, that front-facing facade were to be changed to what is essentially the rear-facing, is there any sense of a significant change in that brick percentage, one direction or the other?
I think it's going to go down.
I do too, but I didn't know if that was something, because sometimes you guys get a submittal that says each side of the building is a certain percentage, and I just didn't see that, so.
Now, if they brought it in and it was segmented and it wound up being less than 80, they could make it hit the 80. Because again, all you have to do is tighten up that ephes area and reduce that down to 80. If it is less than 80, that's one where you can do it as long as it's screened and not visible from any public street, walkway, or residential zoning district. So Some of these standards are hard and fast. Some of them
Yeah.
say they can be modified as long as you do the following. Well, the materials one is a standard that can be modified if you screen it. We're going to deal with that issue a little bit later, that standard. So yeah, they could come in with it being an alternative material that satisfies minimum building code on walls that are screened and not visible from any public street, walkway, or residential zoning district. That's going to be a tough thing to achieve when you look on a public street, which is either Bennett, Old US 1, or Bell, to look up at that face and not be able to see it. That's going to require some heavy screening, and it won't even be in place for many years. So I think in order to comply, they're going to have to come in with some articulate. The 73% one on the top, again, I think if you were to just tighten up some of that tan area or some of those other materials, you would get to 80. They're not at 40 trying to get to 80. They're at 73, and I think it would be achievable.
And isn't it a fact, I haven't been at Bell for a while, but isn't it a fact that across the street from where this development would be, there are residential homes?
I haven't looked at that recently enough to be able to confirm that. That area used to, as recently as a few years ago, had more residential land uses on there, but I'm aware that those have been converting and becoming vacant houses soon. I just don't know which ones, recently that has been occurring, but I wouldn't want to go on a ledge and speculate which ones are or aren't, because it's in flux right now.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I think let's allow the applicant to speak.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Will Huntley, and I'm representing Pinnacle Storage. First of all, Ann, with all due respect, we did not try to take advantage of council on our first submittal. We submitted this because that was an existing condition, but we're fine with the continuance to adjust to 80% brick and fix the elevation that's not segmented.
Well, the articulation.
Articulation, yeah.
And also, I'm sorry, an articulation, to repeat myself because I didn't have my mic on, articulation that is required by the UDO, but also a buffer bell would be of great interest to me too. So,
Is that just you mentioned, BJ, something about just needing to see a landscape plan. Is that the Bell, I lost sight of what all the street names were. When you're going through, what was the landscape plan you wanted to see?
I'll take this. The landscaping plan was merely in response to the issue of granting the deviation to windows on the sides of the buildings in exchange for simply screening those, so there's a little bit more landscaping on the sides if they're not going to have the windows. And in order to show that, to lock it into the application and make sure there's no misunderstanding about it in the future, is simply to submit a landscaping plan. The applicants did say that they had someone working on that, they just didn't get it to us in time. So that was another basis for a continuance, was to lock that in by having that landscaping plan.
I just want to clarify one thing that you'd mentioned. Director Grieve, you mentioned segmentation of walls, and you mentioned articulation. And I think in your report, BJ, you were understanding the use. Articulation was not the concern as much as segmentation?
Yeah, because, and again, it comes from the UDO. The standard says in other districts, the width of buildings or building segments shall not be more than twice the building height.
Right.
And when we have buildings like this come in that are a by right use within that zoning district, so it's
Right.
not, but the nature of the use is obviously the building is going to be pretty wide. So you can't really hold it fast to the building has to be taller than it is wide. So that's achieved through segmentation
Right.
and architectural features.
that's great, that was a valid point, great, I concur.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, is there a motion to continue?
Make a motion that we continue AR 0724 per the planning staff written recommendation, wow, try to say that 10 times fast, contained in the staff report.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I second.
All in favor, vote by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Huntley. Thank you, Mr. Grieve. We'll see one of you, probably in this next one. All right, moving on to 7C, AR-08-24, Moore County Humane Society Animal Shelter.
Good evening, members of council. BJ Grieve with the Town of Southern Pines, here to present an architectural compliance permit submitted by the Moore County Humane Society for the development of a 19,705 square foot animal services and boarding center at a location that is directly across Highway 22 from our new fire station. There's a big piece of property up there. If you could pull up, hang on a second. If you could pull up in the staff report, page 3 of 6 of the staff report. I have it as page 137 of the packet, so if you add 9 to that, it'd be at 146. Thank you.
And soon to have good cell coverage.
Yeah. Subject property, as I said, is located directly across from the fire station, right at the intersection of Wayner Road and Highway 22. This property's been owned by the Humane Society for a number of years. Actually has an interesting history I won't go into in too much detail, but suffice it to say that in 2004, there was a settlement agreement with that ended some litigation between the town and the Moore County Humane Society that resulted in the animal shelter, very similar to the design you see on the site plan in the packet, being approved as a by right use on this property, even though the property is zoned planned development. So property is zoned planned development, but pursuant to a consent decree, settlement agreement was what the language was. I don't want to mix my legal terminology. It was a settlement agreement, and it made this a by right use. Nothing happened since then, and so when the applicants got going on the project again, step one was to talk about our current process, and of course it's site plan review and architectural compliance permits since it's by right. It is by right pursuant to the settlement agreement, but it does have to comply with the UDO now moving forward for the design of the building and design of the site. If you can go to page 168 of the packet, or that would be, I guess, 177, please. 177 has a copy of the site plan. Now, staff has done this analysis and actually determined that we are very close to compliance because of one significant feature of the property. The property, now, you'll have to bear with me because the property is now turned 90 degrees to the right. North is this way, and this is now Wayner Road, okay? Fire station is right here. And the property is pretty heavily treed. And there are existing trees on the west side of the property and on the east side of the property and the south side of the property. So while this is a really pretty good sized building, and it's a beautiful building, there are still some aspects of it, and there are a lot of different faces of it, because it's got a lot of texture to the building. The elevations, the color elevations are in the packet, but we looked at each elevation and determined which way it was facing, and if it didn't meet the building materials requirement, recall that the standard in the UDO says that if it doesn't meet the 80% brick requirement, alternative building materials may be used as long as it's screened, and now the UDO says not visible from a public street. So we looked at it and we said, well, that's going to be fine here because, first of all, most of the sides of it are close. And if you simply retain most of the existing vegetation, they will create a buffer, number one. Number two, this is in the urban transition highway corridor overlay, which requires a 75-foot building setback and a 50-foot highway buffer. Most of this area from about here down, this is the south side of the property, already has easily 50 feet of trees. They don't even have to plant it. They just have to retain what's there. This up here, it gets a little bit thinner, and it gets down to about 20 feet, so you may require some additional planting. But with the 20 feet that's there, plus the 30 feet of planting, the only deviation you might say that might be granted is that it may be visible from a public street through 50 feet of forest, but we've got 20-foot buffers that have come up in discussion recently that all but screen from view. A couple of Southern Pines Gracious Living is all but invisible from the service road, and that's only behind 20 feet of existing vegetation. So the 50 feet to staff, we looked at that, and you'll see it was a fairly quick analysis because given the fact that the highway code overlay will require the 50-foot buffering, given the fact that it's going to be screened from view by simply leaving the vegetation that's there. In other words, we don't have to plant any screening, most likely. Have to plant the buffering and then leave what's there. We are fine with the north elevation being 51% brick, the east being 28 east elevation 1 being 28% brick, south elevation 2 being 74% brick, and so on in that column there. Now, on this issue, recently, I called and talked with the representative of the applicants today, and the applicants have expressed that they feel this is a building that they may wish to be visible from the highway. And this is an issue they can speak to, but staff's response to that was, even if the deviation was granted to the architectural code to allow it to be less than the required building materials, but then be visible. Let's say that was granted in the architectural compliance permit. When we get to the site plan, they still have to have 50 feet of buffering along there, so it's still not going to be visible. There really isn't a way to make it so that the west side of this property is just a green yard through here. And I wanted to point that out because in the aerial renderings, the conceptual aerial renderings that are on page 175 of the packet, they're beautiful. And I really, I'm reluctant to, unfortunately, have to spend so much time sort of with, negative energy on this about something, because it's a beautiful building. It's a great use. I mean, staff have been working with these guys. It's a great project. But I just wanted to point out that this right here, for example, that won't be the ultimate way it looks. It can't be that way under the highway corridor overlay. And the only way to get rid of the highway corridor overlay would be like a variance, because that's not subject to the architectural compliance permit. So all they really have to do is leave the vegetation that's there, and they'll check the box of screening for architectural compliance permit. They don't have to change the building materials. They can get what they want because they're already screened. And it'll meet the highway corridor overlay with a little bit more planting instead of having to replant the whole thing. So that's why, from staff's point of view, it's pretty easy analysis. They're totally fine with that deviation because of all that screening. It'll be there in the highway corridor overlay. I think the disappointment or the downside of this is from the applicants about maybe wanting that building. It's a beautiful building and they're proud of it. It's taken a long time to get it. They want it to be visible, but it's just not going to be pursuant to our standards. And it's not an abnormal. They also don't have direct access to Highway 22, so they don't have a driveway with a visibility triangle that would widen that out like the fire station does. Fire station has direct access to 22, and that's why the fire station is more visible, because the highway corridor overlay didn't require as much buffering planting for them. Okay, the only other issue is related to building loading zones and garage bays. And the garage bays are shown in...
A quick question.
Yeah.
I mean, I can understand why. They want some visibility. They're facing Waynard Road. Do the sign rules allow them to have any kind of signage on 22, or is everything going to have to be on Waynard Road?
The signage standards will allow for one monument sign per land use. If it's a corner lot, you can have 2 monument signs. So they'll probably be able to have one large one on 22. And when I say large, it'll be subject to the size restrictions in the UDO, but it'll be larger than the second monument sign, which can be on Waynard Road. Yeah. They'll also be able to have a building sign, correct? Wall sign. Yeah, they'll be able to have 2 monument signs on a corner, 1 wall sign, and on-site directional signage, and a few other things, a logo sign, things like that are allowed. So, it'll also, again, the driveway entrance off of Waynard Road won't be landscaped. So as you come by on 22, there will likely be a few vantage points where you'll see that opening in Waynard and you'll see that there's something there. You just won't necessarily see it. It won't be front and center as you go up and down 22. That's by design in our community. That really is very much a highway corridor standard. You're familiar with the highway corridor standards we apply all over 15501 and US 1. The only other issue was the building loading zones and garage bays. Garage bay, as long as it is also screened, and as we depicted on the map that's in Table 1, currently their building loading zones and garage bays face Aviation Drive, and therefore, as they just retain the existing vegetation that's on Aviation Drive, it should be screened from view. I will throw out, I talked to the applicant about this issue. Again, I understand the organization's concern. It's a civic organization. It's a nonprofit. They have a beautiful building that's coming. But these are the town standards, and they exist, and we apply them throughout the jurisdiction. I will say that they asked for, in the staff report, the condition states how, it says, condition number 1 states, building materials, the following elevation shall be screened from off-site view using either undisturbed existing vegetation or in accordance with the landscape screen standards of the UDO. The applicant brought up an alternative of saying, rather than saying screened from off-site view, just say screened, or shall be buffered. I forget what the language was. He'll mention what the language was. We're fine with that, because again, if they meet the 50-foot buffering requirement, if they just leave what's there, and therefore I would recommend some language about an undisturbed buffer so they don't cut it. I would hope they wouldn't cut it all down, because then they're just going to pay to replant it, and that doesn't make a lot of sense. But sometimes that happens because your hack and stack guys will go out there and chop the whole thing down, and then they come to us with 45,000 square feet of buffering requirement with just a panic because of the cost, when they could have just left the trees that were there. But that's other forethought of another in another area. It just overlaps with architectural compliance because of that necessity for screening. So if they want to get away from the language of it being screened from off-site view or something like that, these buffers are still required. So staff's receptive to that. If the concern is someone will come along and say, I do see your building through those 50 feet because it's the middle of winter, that's not what we're trying to get at here. We're just trying to follow the code.
And it is a beautiful building.
Yep.
Looks really nice. The amount of parking they have, is that because of our requirements? Or is that how much parking they wanted to have?
Honestly, didn't look at parking for architectural compliance. We haven't seen a site plan on this yet, so I haven't gotten into this. This team has not gotten into counting parking. I appreciate the question.
But, right, but we'll hear from you. If you were trying to comply with town code on parking, and that's the reason that you put as much parking as you have put there, please know you would have a sympathetic audience, I think, to some extent. I think maybe the majority of us, if you wanted to eliminate some of the parking. I love that you have play yards. It really is lovely.
Just so council knows, parking is something that the UDO allows for administrative modification.
Right.
And at this point, virtually anybody that requests, we usually try to request that people go less because they usually exceed the minimum.
Right.
Anybody that comes in wants to do less than the minimum, we have a template for it, we process it, we all but almost always grant it. So.
Can you do that off the top of your head as far as how many spaces would be your recommendation?
Not off the top of my head, but while I'm sitting down while the applicant's speaking, I can look at the UDO for an institutional use and put together what the minimum would be and take a quick look at it, yeah.
Yeah.
Does council have any other questions for BJ before we hear from the applicant? Okay, thank you.
Hello, my name is Mike Mathis with Linden Group Architects, representing Moore Humane Society. I have with me, our team, it's Corky Kern, she's the president of the Humane Society, Ken Just, who's the contractor developer, and then my project manager from Linden Group, Chris Tokars. Just a few quick things of clarification that we wanted to, I think this was taken care of before the meeting, but when the project is referenced in the agenda, it calls it the Moore County Humane Society Animal Shelter, and the correct project name is the Moore Humane Society Animal Welfare Center. Corky Kern is referenced as a representative of Sandstar Enterprises, and we wanted that to be clarified as the president of the Moore County Humane Society, and also it's referenced in that same statement that it's a boarding center, and we don't offer boarding in the building, so if we can strike that as well.
Thank you.
Just real quick, while it's on the top of my head on the parking, when we do animal shelters, we look at parking requirements as they relate to buildings, and we look at ways to reduce the parking. We take out areas of kennel areas because they're not occupied areas. So based on the zoning code, and the reduction of square footage of kennel areas, it requires 66 spaces. And on our current plan, we have 61 spaces provided. So we can work further with BJ on that. I think with the clinic use that's part of this, we have a low-cost clinic. There is the potential for higher volume times on a Saturday if they're offering a spay-neuter event or something. So I think that's one consideration. But I know that from the beginning, they were talking about, do we have too much parking, and trying to make sure we're at the sweet spot of, what was the appropriate amount of development.
I'd be interested in what is your parking dream?
Right. And I think we're there now, but as
Okay.
you were bringing up the question, Corky was kind of, I saw her suggesting that maybe they could have less. I think it's probably a discussion with the whole team and BJ as well to kind of
Okay.
figure out what that sweet spot is. Is this, yeah, this is, and can I advance this or I have you do it? Okay. Yeah, I'll give a quick overview of the project. I think BJ gave a pretty good outlay of the history of the project. This is the site plan, shows you orientation of the building. If you go to the next slide, you just get a little bigger depiction. I'll even advance one step further. I think I have a pointer here. I can reference a few things just to give you a, so you can get it. Yeah, that would do better.
Yeah, the pointer won't work on screen.
All right. Is it on? Yeah. All right, so basically the entry point that faces Wayner Road and the intersection of New Highway 22 brings you into the facility. We have an education center, which is a big part of the use where they educate on animal welfare. On the left side, we have our administrative offices. The cat adoption areas toward the center, oriented on the courtyard. And we have 2 dog holding wings. We call them neighborhoods. That's for adoptions. And then we have our intake, which is over here, and then our clinic, which is here. So we have 2 main public entries, the lobby, which is our adoption entry, and then our clinic entry, which is facing. I guess I'll stay here. Advance to the next slide. The building also is included, has a basement. BJ mentioned 17,000 square feet. It's a building, and I think the basement is another 2,500. It's meant for storage and also for emergency in case of a hurricane or a storm event where they might need to take shelter with the animals. So that was an important aspect to the project. Advance to the next slide. This just depicts the elevations. As BJ mentioned, this area, there is a pretty good existing vegetation along New Highway 22, and I did include on the back end of this presentation just some pictures from Google View, so you can get a quick view of that. And we're totally fine with BJ's comments about leaving that and creating a buffer as is required by the site plan requirements. We were concerned about this language that strongly stated no visibility of the building, because we felt like we've gone to a lot of effort to make the building beautiful and include architectural details and segments. And we put a few materials in that deviate from brick, but we didn't put in materials that were reducing cost of the building. They were architectural, purposeful choices with metal panels, and I'll talk a little bit more about that.
Mr. Mathis, are you okay with the inclusion of the undisturbed buffer language?
Yes, we
Okay,
are.
thank you.
Advance to the next slide. So one of the things that, just another important point when it looks at brick over the whole project, I think I heard BJ mention in the last presentation that sometimes brick is considered per elevation and sometimes clients come in or petitioners come in with it as a whole. This particular part on the back facing of the building, we had an alternate to change to brick. And in the event that we did that, on the next slide, it shows that just overall, maybe it's the next slide, on the overall percentage of the building brick, is 82%. So that was an alternate that we just had brought to the staff as something we would consider to make the brick, the entire building as a whole over 80% brick. But when you look at it per elevation, it deviates from that. Next slide. So this just highlights the areas that are being considered as accent material on each elevation. I think the most important elevation is the Wayner Road that faces 22, excuse me. We have broken the building into segments. We've anchored the architecture with brick anchors on either side. We've included architectural details on the brick with an accent color, so we have 2 different color bricks. And we've included a cornice to include some of that traditional detailing. And then the first accent element is this metal wood look panel that we've used to identify the entrance and bring attention to our signage. And then the next accent material that's in the calculations is this metal trim that goes around the windows. So that's also being considered as accent material and increasing that percentage up further. And then we have a light aluminum panel that's in this section, which is also attributes to that accent material percentage. And you can see, I mean, what we're really trying to do, I think, meets the intent of the UDO, that we're trying to create an elevation that has segments, that has a little bit of ups and downs and interests, and I think it plays well on the elevations. As we work with staff, there were other things that we realized that we had segments, some segments that were too long, so we introduced elements of accent material again, where we dropped the parapet height and put a metal panel there to create that segment that we feel was what the UDO was asking for. But because of that, we introduced an accent material, which increased our area for accent material. This is the east-facing elevation. One of the things, when you look at the percentages that are in the staff report, you see east elevation 1 and 2. If you look at the overall elevation, this elevation between this part and this part really read together. So, you know, if it's separated, I think it shows a brick percentage of like 30%. If you put them both together, it's closer to 50%, which I think is more reflective of our intent of the project as a whole, trying to be close to that 50% on the brick as we went around the building on each elevation. So next slide. This is just, you know, we have a lot of oblique angles, so as we, for our materials, we presented each elevation and true elevation with the percentages for staff to review.
Can I ask you a question on that part? The west elevation south, and then on the other slide there
Brandon,
was,
check your mic.
I'm sorry. The bottom right corner, west, partial west elevation south, and then on the previous slide, there was partial east elevation north. Over those windows, I don't remember what you called that, but over those two windows, there's a panel there. Yeah, you did that to, what was the reason for doing that?
So we're creating, this elevation on its own is too large of a segment. So we need, based on it not being able to be twice the height.
Right.
We put that panel in there, and you can't see it because of the way it's shaded, but the parapet, that cornice drops down there, and that creates just a break in that roof line, which kind of helps, I think. And rather than putting more brick in there, you know, we had this play of metal panels and brick.
And other places.
It seemed like it worked well. You see it again here, and like you
Yes.
mentioned, it's in those other elevations.
Okay.
And the panel is a route and return aluminum composites like backed, and I have samples for you, but it is considered a pretty high-end material, but it isn't brick, and we understand that the intent is to be predominantly brick, but I think it does complement the brick well.
So you personally like the change like that anyway, rather than all
Yeah, we
all that
do. I
being
think
brick?
it added to the
Okay.
architecture,
Okay.
and that was something we did after meeting with staff, is to meet the segment requirement.
Good enough. Thank you.
You can see it a lot better on page 176, the top left image. It's like the three-dimensional version. Yes, I believe so. No, right here. Yeah, zoom into that, if you can, the one on the top left. It's actually the left side of that building, I think, is where we're looking at. Yep,
Yeah, all the way to the back, behind the clinic.
right there. Thank you, Gerald.
Yeah, it definitely renders better there.
I think it looks nice in this version of it. It's hard to tell in the 2D version.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there's the light aluminum, the dark aluminum, and then the wood panel is that extruded aluminum piece, which, you know, it's nice to get warm material on a building, and this is a way, we consider that a real high-end material, and we're kind of disappointed that it's sort of a strike against our material quota to put it on the building.
I don't think we're considering it a strike. I think it looks really nice.
Good. Well, and I think the UDO does have a little bit of leeway for considering a material of equal value to brick that's not considered an accent material, and I think for ease of interpretation, I think it was considered that these were just accent materials in the effort to make the building predominantly brick. But I think we're close, and I think we've taken steps to try to add brick where we could.
And I think what you said earlier, that you're trying to, or that you're meeting the intent of the UDO is accurate. I think that you're doing that.
I'm not sure, there's only, I pretty much can, there's just a couple of slides left. I think we can maybe fast forward to the last slide, which has let's see what's in here. That just, I think it just gives a good visual for you of the 3 vantage points. So, from New Highway 22, this is from Wayner looking south, okay? And so you can see, this is where we were concerned about language about not being able to see the building. And we understand that per our site approval, we're going to have a 50-foot buffer we need to design in to meet the standards of the site plan. But we didn't want to have, as part of our architectural approval, that we had to screen the entire building. Because it is a public service building, and we do want some visibility. But as mentioned, we can do that by bringing signage out to the entryway. So that's that. And then from Wayner Road, we are going to get some sight into the building because we're allowed that opening. So we'll get some sight line into there. That's this view here. One of the things, though, is we're kind of down from the road elevation. So this Wayner Road, all of Aviation Drive, and the intersection are about 14 feet taller than our finished floor of our building. And there's a little bit of a berm here on this vegetation. So there's quite a bit of screening in that regard, of just that the building sits down lower. As 22 goes south, it drops down. And so at this point, you know, where you see that lighter, you start to get some sight lines. But one of the nice things is this is our west elevation, which meets the UDO for brick. So where you start to see the building more, we have the brick requirement met.
Does it drop down enough to see the roof of your building?
What? We'd have to look at that in relationship. I think there's enough distance of land from where, you know, your vantage point where you're looking. But I know we are committed to the screening of any mechanical units that are on the roof. I think is part of the UDO, and it's a statement that's made in part of our report.
Okay.
I think that sums up material-wise. I think just to restate on BJ's comments about language from the staff report, I can jump to that on my notes. The first question is, do we need condition 1 related to these elevations and additional screening, or does the UDO in its prescribed 50-foot buffer give us what we need already? But I think that basically condition 1 is speaking to the requirements of buffering in the UDO, so I work fine either way. The language on the end of deviation 1, it says, brick as depicted on the submitted building elevations because the building, it says, will not be visible from the public street. We would like to strike will not be visible from the public street and change it to will be buffered with appropriate buffer. So that was one of the requests. And then under the condition, it says building materials, the following elevations shall be screened from off-site view. We'd like to move that remove from off-site view and just say shall be either screened or buffered. I think I need to have a better understanding with BJ on what the appropriate word is for that. I think based on the UDO requirements for site plan, I think it's buffer, but I would refer to BJ on that one.
Yeah. You got that mic on, do that one, yeah. You're doing what I was doing, I have a double mic.
I was just going to say, if, kind of like we did before, I'm okay so far tracking everything, but if instead of my trying to clunkily do this, maybe have y'all take 2 minutes before we make a motion to knock out exactly the verbiage, I would appreciate it.
I will say, I think we're really close. I think the intent is there all the way around. I do want to be really clear about that. We've got a few hangups, but a lot of our hangups are from previous experiences with sites getting cleared and whatnot. But everything we're hearing is that your intentions is the same as ours. So we can, whatever little things here we have, I just want to be clear, because if I say little details, it sounds like I'm fighting against the project or arguing something that's not the case at all. Okay. No problem with using the phrase buffer, because buffer is a proper noun in the UDO and it means something. The only thing is that you use the phrase buffer if it's meant to achieve the standard for the building materials that are less than 80. And although we all agree it's a beautiful building, what this is also doing is it's using the only hook we have to make sure that 8 months from now, that site doesn't get clear cut because grading required it. And the engineer says, I'm sorry, got to clear the whole site, and then you're going to have to replant it. It's just the way it is. So a condition regarding a width of buffering, because buffering is a standard that has a width, number one. If there's something that can be better achieved using undisturbed existing buffer and save money on landscaping, because landscaping gets really expensive when you don't just, that tells the engineer when they're designing it, you got to leave that alone. You got to figure out a way to make it work without doing that. So I would say if we do take a recess and work through this,
Great.
I just want the council to know that I'll be fighting for if the word buffering is used, that it has a distance, because 20 or 30 or 40, it's divided by the length and the width. Excuse me, it's multiplied by the length and width to get an area for planting a buffer. And I'd also look to prioritize retention of existing vegetation for dual purposes.
Yeah, I think the other thing on the existing vegetation, the only issue you mentioned the grading, met up with our engineer today. And so there's a row of good standard trees up here that are elevated at Aviation Drive, which is like 350. And then there's a drainage swell that comes through here. And on our side of the drainage swell, there's a shorter growth of smaller pines that are pretty full, but they're all sort of in the development line of that curve edge. So I think we're going to lose, I mean, we will try to maintain what we can, but we're going to lose some of that second. You can't actually see it too much in this photo, but it's some of this lower growth stuff here, and there's some more as you go further. But we're also talking about pulling our building a little bit further to the south so that we can maintain as much of all this tree growth here, which I think provides that. There's that second tier I think is going to be difficult with grading, like you said. We're going to do it where we can. And definitely on the outer edge, those edges where it's towards the roadways, it's going to be easy to do.
We've just had, sadly, a bad experience with, we'll do what we can, and then it's clear cut. Oh, sorry. And we're just trying to really protect where we can.
I think it adds to the site to have that too. I think BJ mentioned when we were talking about it, is there's a sense of arrival when you come into a grove of trees, right? Which is kind of cool, and it's appropriate for an animal shelter. So I think that if we do both, it'll give us a balance of a little bit of vision, but also give us that feeling of a space, which would be great.
Is there a chance you all could chat about parking as well during the break?
Yeah, we can certainly visit about it. That one is parking really is not, it doesn't fall under any of the 4.10.4, but we can visit about it and see where they're at on it, yeah.
All right, let's take a recess until 8:30. Does that sound okay? Okay, thank you, guys.
Yeah, we can.
I'm going to bring the meeting back to order. Has staff and the applicant had an adequate amount of time to discuss?
We have.
Good.
What actually came to mind was about to say, we have. I was about to say, Your Honor. And then I was like, no, don't say that. But then
I'll
my brain
answer
went
to
blank on
either.
what to
It's
say. I was
okay.
about to say Mayor, but I thought Honorable Mayor. All right. Under deviation number 1, we would propose modifying the language as such. I will skip to the end, starting with the word brick. Brick as depicted on the submitted building elevations because the building will be buffered from a public street with retained existing vegetation and landscaping.
I think that sounds good.
And that's just setting up the deviation.
Okay.
And then you'd go on to have a condition that I appreciate the applicant's cooperation on this. I think it's a good way to come off of our standard for screening to not be visible from public street, but still retain what we're trying to do under the comprehensive plan and all of our previous experience. Regarding the condition number 1 would read as follows. Regarding UDO 4.10.4C, building materials, the following elevations shall be buffered using either a minimum 30-foot undisturbed existing vegetation, or with a minimum 30-foot buffering per the UDO landscaping code.
Okay.
Yeah, either. Now, to be clear, and I made the 50-foot on the highway corridor overlay would still be 50 foot, and they understand that. This is the minimum. This is the option for the rest of the way around. And they have the space for the 30 foot, and it works with some of, what was it, a utility easement you have in there? So there's a utility easement that's off the property line. They can still get 30 feet in there, and it would be either undisturbed. And this would incentivize retaining the existing vegetation. And then under condition number 2, you would simply remove, after shall be, you would remove screened or, shall be buffered in accordance with landscape screens or landscape, in accordance with the landscape buffer standards of the UDO landscaping code. Okay.
Okay.
So in the first 2, we're attempting to keep undisturbed. And then in condition 2, we just need to be screened in accordance with landscape standards.
Because the condition number 2, after condition number 1 is met, and it would have to be, it's going to be a minimum 30-foot either planted buffer or undisturbed or some combination. So if they have 15 feet of existing vegetation, they can retain that and only plant 15 of buffer, if that makes sense. Hopefully it does.
And you feel like that adequately incentivizes them to keep the existing?
Yeah, I believe so, because if I was telling the applicants, there's no ill intention here, but the reason why this occurs is once the engineers grab the site and start looking at it, a lot of times the grading on the site, the slopes of the site just require, in order to get the building that needs to be built and the parking and to get the stormwater slopes just right, it just requires that you do a lot of mass grading on the site, and the more mass grading you do, the further out you move. And the further out you move, the more you hit up against those. So it incentivizes, hopefully, doing other engineering techniques to say, yeah, we could flatten it all out and push all the way out to the right-of-way, or we could deal with a little bit of, we could do a retaining wall, or we could do, a certain slope, and we move the little bit of parking over here to retain the grade on that slope we need and replant it, just to try to get that going.
Okay.
You're incentivizing retaining existing vegetation and not requiring it by using the word undisturbed. Is that correct?
Incentivizing it because if you cut it down, you're going to have to replant it, which comes at a huge expense.
But you remove the word undisturbed, correct? In the first
In the first condition, what I said was regarding UDO 4.10.4C building materials, the following elevation shall be buffered using either a minimum 30-foot undisturbed existing vegetation or with a minimum 30-foot buffering planted.
Okay.
So if you have vegetation there, it's smarter to keep it.
Yeah. But if they run into a challenge, they could replace it. That's fine. I'm fine with that. I'm just,
But the language encourages the engineer to comply with the intent of all the parties. So that's great.
We've learned a lot about this with our work on the landscaping code, and it
Right.
is a really challenging issue, trying to hit that
Right.
sweet spot of an adequate incentive, but also not making it so difficult that you render sites undevelopable, and that is a very difficult balance. We're.
back.
Right.
All right, does the council feel comfortable with that language? And the applicants agreed to everything? Okay, is there a motion?
I will make a motion to approve AR 08-24, one deviation and two conditions as written in the July 9th, 2024 staff report and as modified by Planning Director Grieve at the July 9th hearing, and also for the report to be modified for the correction of proper names, titles, use of boarding as initially referenced by the applicant in their opening statement.
Second.
All in favor, vote by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, guys. And good luck with the building, it's beautiful.
Thank you.
Oh, bless our heart. Wow. Thank you. Thank you.
Through our recording, you'll be able to track those things. I just couldn't write them all down, the names and, okay, good. Thank you.
Congrats.
Okay. Item 7D, WP-02-24, the 570 exemption allocation for Phoenix Village.
I'd love to be heard whenever you want me to be heard. Yeah.
Yeah, right now?
Yeah, great.
Oh, about this,
About this,
Okay.
yeah.
would you like to wait until after?
Yeah, let's go ahead.
Okay. Good to see you this evening.
I think just, I'll go ahead and be heard. I think the main thing that I feel in regard to these requests, this is a limited resource. And I think this is a policy decision that the council needs to address as to how we do that. Because right now, how we administer offering up this limited resource. And as of now, it appears to be a first come, first serve. However, I think what you're going to tell me is Phoenix is asking for a 36-acre exemption, and in order to do what they need to do, a 16.6-acre allocation would do the job.
I have the benefit of, I sat through the TRC meeting when they had this conversation.
Awesome.
So I know that Director Grieve has some good information, but I do agree with you that we should discuss policy on how to allow or,
Right.
yeah,
How to,
give exemption.
what's our
Yes.
word?
I don't know.
Distribute.
Distribute, that's.
There we
that's
go.
good. Okay. We are all ears.
Let me, BJ Grieve, Town of Southern Pines Planning Department. Let
Thank
me
you for
start
joining us.
off, if I may, by explaining how in our office we attempt to communicate with the public the strategic use of watershed protection permits and exemption allocation. When we have projects that are within the core areas identified now in our comprehensive plan as targeted for development that are arguably, under any reasonable definition, infill areas that have existing sewer, water, roads, et cetera, and that are part of or that are designated for such as some of our activity centers. When those requests come in, like this one, we favor those. We say, you know what, we can support that because that's really consistent with what the comp plan says about directing growth and taking that which is limited resource, 5%, under a 570 calculation, you take, hey, 5% of your jurisdiction that's within this watershed can be covered up to 70%. So if 5% can be covered up to 70%, where would you put that? Well, logically, you would not put it on wetlands at the edge of town that they have to extend water and sewer and roads to get to. You would put it places you already have that. So that said, this situation that comes before you this evening, a request for a watershed protection permit for Phoenix Village for a fairly large number, 36.4 acres. This is born of, Phoenix is a pre-1993 development. It exists before 1993, but whatever the built upon area was pre-93 is what it's capped at. So we actually, This is part of the problem, is we've had a really difficult time figuring out exactly what that pre-1993 number was, because believe it or not, in 1993, they did not send a surveying crew out across the entire town to find all the built-upon area and mark it and measure it, and that's been a challenge ever since, for literally ever since then. So what we do know is that there was a percentage, so up until now, whenever PNIC comes in and has a development or a redevelopment project where they tear down, let's say, 4 duplexes and want to replace it with a multifamily building, we try to assess what was the built-upon area of the 4 duplexes and the parking and the area that served those. And let's say it comes to 11,000, I don't know why I chose 11,000, that wasn't very, 10,000, let's go with that, a nice round number. Say it's 10,000 square feet. Now the multifamily building comes in and the total impervious of that is gonna be, let's say, 12,000 feet. Well, now we go and we say, well, unless you either apply for exemption allocation or try to find 2,000 feet elsewhere of your pre-93 built upon area to eliminate, it actually just winds up being this constant problem within PNIC. And everyone, staff included, is like, why are we doing this? It's a pre-93 development. It's a location. It's a known area where an existing CCRC is developed. We shouldn't have to be doing this with every single time they want to redevelop a building, because it almost discourages the redevelopment of buildings. It almost discourages tearing down buildings that aren't serving their clients well and redeveloping them into nicer buildings. So we finally decided, hey, it seems like the best thing to do would be to go just wipe the slate clean, grant 36 acres of exemption allocation, and now we just know every time they come in, PNIC has 70% for all the land they own. And it is for the 36.4 acres, but you do have to look at the total land, you're not giving up, make sure I can explain this correctly. If somebody comes in with 5-acre piece of property, but they're only developing an acre, they don't get an acre of exemption allocation, they have to get 5 acres of exemption allocation. Now, of that 5 acres, they can do up to 70%, which is why if somebody comes in with a development that's only an acre on a 5-acre, we will discourage them from doing exemption allocation. Now, an acre on 5 acres may be able to do the under 24 with stormwater, but, because I just happened to pick one that's probably 20%, but. I should, yeah. Let's say 3 out of 5. And so, and so that's what we try not to waste that allocation. And we do, the council doesn't see it, but we do on a regular basis. I wouldn't say a regular basis, but it does come up from time to time where someone will say, what about this? And we'll go, well, that's actually part of the such and such watershed. And that level of density, that level of built upon area would be 36%, but you would need 7 acres of exemption allocation out at the edge of town just to go to 36%. That's a waste of exemption allocation. If you're going to get exemption allocation, go as close to 70 as you can, because we want to put it in limited areas. This would be the example of one of those areas, in staff's opinion, based on the comprehensive plan and based on premises of infill. So we would say this, our recommendation is to grant the 36.4 acres of exemption allocation. The applicants are on board with it, and they're going to waive their pre-93 built upon area just to start over, so everything is clear. And then we would reduce this, and it would leave 412.14 acres of allocation within the Little River number 2 watershed. And we think this is a good use of exemption allocation.
So part of the reason that that they're asking for such a large acreage for the exemption is not necessarily that it's a bunch of new development or they're changing, it's just really to clean up.
That's
a
correct.
track record.
There is new development, and quite frankly, this is an area where we would want them to be able to go to 70% built upon area. That it's just, if you think about where PNIC is in relation to our developed area and where we want to continue to infill is a policy that goes all the way back to the 2010 comprehensive plan. It's continued in the current comprehensive plan. And so it has successfully prevented quite a bit of subdivisions at the outer fringes of the community by absorbing a lot of growth within established core areas of our community. So that and a few other policy shifts, but yeah, so that's the extent of my presentation. I appreciate, Ann, the nice segue into right into 36.4 acres. Thank you. And there we are.
Happy to do that on BJ take 6 or whatever, yeah, all right. So what happens if we only approve tonight 16.6 acres total?
I would, if that's how you feel, I would just say don't, because they're probably better with their pre-93 allocation, because it's probably more than 16 acres if they just retain their pre-1993 value. We're just going to have to continue to, every time they walk in, we're going to have to spend the first half of the meeting talking how we're going to calculate built-upon area and how we're going to establish no net increase in pre-1993 number, which is a number we only kind of guesstimate.
And kind of the problem with this approach, I guess, is what I see is that it deducts the entire acreage from the allotment. And there's already an allotment allowed, right? So there's not the 36.4 acres includes whatever percentage was there before, or whatever acreage was there before 93. So
That's not incorrect. I don't have an argument for that.
Yeah.
That is correct. That is I guess, a downside of trying to tidy this up.
Yes.
Yeah.
They're losing some availability of built
No,
upon
they're probably
surface.
gaining net increase. Their pre-93 built-upon area is probably less than 70%.
Okay,
It is less than 70%.
okay, so we're just losing the exemption that we can give up. Okay.
So what is the acreage, roughly, the 93 acreage of impervious surface? Do you have that hard number?
In Phoenix?
Yes.
I don't know. Sorry.
40,
It's approximately 9 acres. There you go.
So we're
Thank you.
losing 9 acres additional, is it then?
Yeah, but they're capped at 9 without exemption allocation.
Right.
So then every time they develop every time they come in with a larger rooftop, they have to reduce it somewhere else. And by retaining only 9 out of 36, you're not putting development where it really should go.
No, but what I'm getting at is it's really only 9 acres that's coming out of that allotment.
Right, and we're.
Right.
36.
Yeah, and how many acres is the total site?
36.4. It's 36.4 acres of exemption allocation is.
I got you,
yeah,
got you.
Yeah.
Is understanding that this ask is the pre-93, pre-existing conditions and everything else, is this a little bit of a unique, I feel like we've been saying that a lot tonight,
Yeah.
but I don't want this to then line up 17 other like chunks to be like, oh, well, Phoenix did it, we're doing it, and then suddenly we have 10, 30 to 40 acre asks coming
Yeah.
back to back. I mean, this one appears to me to be unique, but I just want to make sure that it is compared to what you see or know that's out there.
Yeah, it's a great question. You know, every project, every property, every project is a little bit unique, but it's. I wouldn't say it's so unique. It's not as unique as that general business conditional district for the cell tower. I tell you that. That one that's a high bar of unique. No, I mean it's not. I guess I would say that again. With respect to, it is the council's decision. It's a policy decision. If, you know, yeah, so I got no issues with that. I would say if we're not using exemption allocation to put it and allow for up to 70% built upon area in locations like this, where are the locations where it's more appropriate to put it? That's the question I would have for council for that guidance is.
And that's the policy. That's the reason to make a policy.
Yeah.
Which we don't have. We're playing whack-a-mole right now with these exemptions.
There are policies within the comprehensive plan that are giving staff guidance on where we should direct the allocation of exemption allocation, the granting of exemption allocation, but.
Is it worthwhile to go back and look at this and see if there's another way to clean this up without a 36.4 acre reduction to the allotment?
There's always another way, and we'll be happy to, if that would make council more comfortable to come back with more information, we're happy to do that, no problem. I would say it has been studied a lot, and the applicants are here. I would recommend that if they because they've experienced this journey with us over the last, in my time, 7 years, and I know that, you know, every time Phoenix comes in, we spend a lot of time on this. We're all scratching our heads pretty much, because nobody really knows what that number was in 1993. They've come up with the best estimate, but that issue of having to make sure there's no net increase without exemption allocation, it's really difficult for them to take an existing CCRC campus that has all the infrastructure and add buildings and further enhance a facility that serves a need of the community in a location that if you don't put it here, you put it out at the edge of town where land is relatively inexpensive. And so it's keeping the demand for this land use from out on Camp Easter Road or elsewhere. Because where else would you build, where else are you going to find 36 acres to build a CCRC to meet a need of the community? That's.
We want it downtown, yeah. We want our 570 exemption in the city center.
Yeah, and along the lines of Councilman Pate's question, the most parallel scenario I can kind of equate to this, and ironically enough, we're talking about two tax exempt entities, but Sand Hills Community College. We had worked out and negotiated a deal, I don't know, 10, 12, 15 years ago for Moore County to actually transfer a portion. They've got a huge allotment of 570 credits because it's a very rural county, and but we had them transfer, because you are allowed to do that within the same watershed, some of these credits to the town specifically to cover the boundaries of the community college, because they were talking at that time about adding what is now the nursing school, the Bradshaw expansion. There is where the garage mechanic type of stuff out there. And staff at that time was having very similar issues with what was pre-93, what needs to be. But again, that scenario played out well because we could go to Moore County and say, look, this is a county-wide type of opportunity, bring this. But along your question, Bill, I don't think there's a lot of like 40 acres here, 80 acres there, 90 acres there, but that is what I would consider the most parallel scenario of what was an established development pre-93 that is now redoing buildings, maybe expanding within their boundaries, and these challenges exist because, like BJ said, nobody ran out and did an actual survey in 93 and established it at that
It's a
time.
great parallel, right, but,
parcel is one contiguous tract. I mean, it's not individual.
I believe so. It is one contiguous tract right now, yeah.
and we think pre-93 that there were 9 acres allotted
Of 36, that's what
of 36.
Yeah, come on up. Absolutely. I'm sorry, it's not my place to
would've said
invite him up.
15.
It's your place to invite him up.
Please come up.
I was just looking for a lifeline, quite frankly, like, you know more than I do.
Getting tired of talking to BJ tonight. Thanks for having me. My name is Rob Will with McGill Associates, and I'm representing Phoenix Village as their civil engineer. Question was, we've worked with BJ's colleague in the planning department, Elena Millette, to develop what that pre-1993 allocation is, which we've come up, it's approximately 9 acres, is what we've been using for past projects as well as this one. With that 9-acre pre-1993 allocation, it will be very difficult to construct this current project with the area swaps that we are required to achieve under current code without an exemption.
Do you have a residual amount of the 9 acres left to put toward the new project, in your opinion?
There is a portion of that 9 acres that is available to put
Can you
towards the project.
Can you define the portion?
Less than half of the 9 acres. I don't have a definite number off the top of my head.
And what would you need for, what allocation would you need for the current projects?
We can go back and get that information for
Well,
you.
Up here, it says a total of 16.6 acres, right? So
That doesn't account for the 9. Right, that's what I think. It's, so if you guys want 36-acre allotment, and we have 416, I mean, let's do the math. We could do this 12 times, and we could tie the hands of every council from here until the end of time.
And as BJ stated earlier, the request for the 36.4 is over the entire Phoenix parcel.
Right.
Going forward, so we don't, every time that the owner does a project out on site, we don't have this same conversation from the
Right,
council.
right.
We do not need the whole 36.4 for this specific project. At
Do you
the,
have a number that you do need based on using some of the existing 9, the half of the 9 acres that you say could go toward allotment here, plus whatever else you might need? Do you have a number in your head?
unfortunately, I don't have a specific number off the top of my head, unfortunately, to
Right.
give you tonight.
But, I mean,
But we can determine that number, yes.
with your early example, with like 5-acre parcel, only build on one, we give the exemption for the whole
You have
parcel,
to
right?
take out the full 36-acre parcel unless there's some form of subdivision, and, I mean, there may be a way to
can't
work
give it
around that, but
piecemeal.
it's not the build-upon area that you are allocating. It's the entire parcel that you're allocating the potential to cover 70% of.
That's why I was asking if there were multiple parcels.
Yeah, it would make a difference.
That's the case.
So as soon as as soon as you exceeded, if you did identify it was 9 acres, y'all were satisfied that wasn't an issue. As soon as you exceeded that, you would then be asking for the exemption if you were going to do anything new.
For example, at 9 acres, by my quick math, that's going to be 25% of a 36-acre tract. And the key figures that sort of trigger this sort of thing is 12% built upon, or 24 with whatever the current term is for best management practices. Just think retention basins and things like that. So they were literally at 9 acres utilizing that math. It's the type of thing that if they were coming in today, staff would look at that and say, you are 1% over. We really don't want to have to allocate this 36 acres. What can you do to not cover 1 more % of this property? But they were already in 1% excess of that in 93, if 9 acres is the accurate figure. So now they're playing this, I say they with staff are playing this game of, you're just barely over, but every time you build something new, what's coming down to offset it? It's a really awkward.
Yeah, and then from our point of view, you look at where it is and you say, man, this should be allowed to go up to 70% because of the location and because of all the surrounding infrastructure. You can walk from here to other things, and you can walk to this from our other residential land uses. And so in that regard, it's consistent with a lot of our comprehensive plan about where you should put this. You'll notice we do bring in a lot of small residential lots in the downtown area for 0.17 of acre of an exemption here and of allocation here and there. Those are all small, but they're in the right place. This one just happens to be, there aren't a lot of 36-acre parcels in this area,
It's to figure out a way that the sunk value of 9 acres doesn't count against, but it does.
Yeah, we'll talk about that
If the
sometime.
extension to the Campbell House happens, will we have to put in the entire Campbell House property?
I mean, I can't answer that because that's a much bigger property. You could get, if you use stormwater management, you can get up to 24% on that property and probably, have quite a bit of built upon area. Phoenix as a CCRC is just a unique, fairly more intense land use. And it's unique because it's under single ownership and it has that much built upon area and there's just a lot of other things.
I would also offer relative to the finite nature of this, because I've been watching this slowly dwindle down, and I say slowly because it truly has been slowly when you look at the aggregate number. It's taken a long time, and we're still at the 200 whatever acres you just quoted. There are methodologies by which, should a council in the future get to a point of getting to a number that they are not comfortable with. We are at 570. We are an asterisk in the state statute. Most are at 1070. If a council were to take action, there would be methodology by way you could potentially double overnight what is available. I'm not recommending that today.
Litigation, aren't we?
It was an agreement at that time, and it predated me, but I've had a little too much history in this too. The other thing that is very much available, or has been historically, is working with, for instance, Moore County. They're going through a comprehensive planning process now. They're talking about trying to maintain some agricultural areas and such. One way to do that is to transfer development rights, i.e. allocation credits, to communities where you can put density and just not utilize it out on those areas that you want to have as farmland. So there are options in the future relative to that. The other thing I would offer is that I talked about how relatively slowly it has been going down, and that's including the fact that, now I mentioned that the county sent us some allocation for the community college, but there have been some relatively large allocations relative to our overall amount that have already been granted to what is now today the Tyler's Ridge development. There was an allocation granted to the commercial area of the Pine Needles development that I think is called Knollwood out on US 1 that has not yet developed. So a lot of, and of course, the Morganton development is not a watershed consideration. It's outside of the Protect 570 area. So a lot of the larger tracts that Southern Pines actually have available for development have already been provided allocation. So it literally, future allocations tend to, I think 36 acres might be the largest thing you've seen for some time that I can think of off the top of my
think it's
head.
probably why
It's
there's
literally going to
questions.
be an acre here, 2 acres there, and that shrinking is going to occur very
They would
slowly.
consider an allocation for Phoenix?
I could not answer that.
Let me ask this question. Is in that our allocation?
Make a case for it.
Yes. Is in that allocation that we have, does that include acreage in the ETJ?
Good question.
I want to say it's planning jurisdiction, but I believe it's it's planning jurisdiction as of, I'll verify it. I'm pretty sure the answer to that today is yes. It was not at one time. We went back because the ETJ was expanded for Southern Pines, and that was post 93, and the allocation doesn't automatically move with that sort of thing. So we did some recalculation at one point when, I think it was way back when Andrea Surratt was at Moore County.
Do we know what the value of that allotment is purely coming from ETJ? And if we didn't have ETJ, what that allotment would drop to?
Let me go back and look at the work we did on that.
I have a question for the Phoenix folks. I don't know if it's you or two more representatives from you guys. I don't want to allocation if you're like, this is it. We're at our max. We're never going to be able to further. But I know you can only answer this given current environment, but currently with what you're seeing at the CCRC demand and level, I mean, do you anticipate that, yes, if this is granted, you would anticipate continuing to expand to meet the needs of the community up to that? I mean, maybe not max at the 70%, but not stopping here to where we grant it and you're never going to do anything else again. I don't know if that makes sense. I just want to make sure that from what you're seeing, do you foresee needing to continue to meet demand by growing?
You know, based on this current project, we've sold 80% of what's available within 2 weeks. So there's a high demand already that exists. If you look at the demographic shift expected in our county and the state and beyond, there's a tremendous need. In fact, in our county, based on the current projections, there is a real deficit in the amount of housing available for seniors. So we anticipate continuing to grow. And we believe that there's very much a need in our community. And this obviously would help us pave the way. And it sounds like it would also make it a little bit of a smoother process for the town too.
Thank you.
What are the thoughts of the council of either granting exemption or having staff review other options?
I'd kind of like to look at another option if it exists. And also, in light of recent stuff in Raleigh, what happens to that allotment if we lose it, right? The ATJ and what happens. So it's not a no, it's just a not yet, I guess, for me.
Okay. We'll go in order. Go ahead.
Well, no, I'd be interested in whether or not the county would donate that allotment to us. Say it again, sorry?
For Phoenix specifically.
Right.
So at least look at other options, that one included, okay.
Yes, I mean, yeah, if the county will donate it, fantastic. I guess definitely ask, but if they don't, I'm still comfortable with it. I do appreciate Planning Director Greaves' explanation of the allocation and the use, and just the community benefit for that, what Phoenix Village does, I would be okay with it if we're asked to vote yes or no at some point.
Yeah, I was ready to approve it as well, but I took pause in listening to Councilman Goodman's concern for maybe just a little bit more information, so.
And based on location, I would have been willing to grant it as well. So if I'm open to whatever motion you guys want to take moving forward, I will follow your all's lead.
Director Greaves, do you have any other comments regarding this?
Oh, it's just the opening I needed. I mean, holy cow, where do, no.
We wanted to make sure you had an opportunity to speak tonight.
Right.
To Councilman Goodman's comment, I'm not sure of a different way to deal with Phoenix at this point, in terms of options. We've actually done a lot of shell game with built upon area and exemption allocation over the years with Elena is kind of the latest victim of trying to dig into this and I think that the way we use exemption allocation, the way we communicate it to those interested in pursuing development and the way that it's used to avoid allocation, in weird, in sprawly areas, that interface heading out into and to avoid, granting it for 32%, that type of thing. This one doesn't concern me. I don't feel that I'm bringing forth to you a request for an exemption allocation that is a big ask. I think it's actually a very reasonable place. If I've got 412 acres to allocate, and when you consider the use and the demand for the use and the demographics of our community, I think the gentleman from Phoenix said it very well. I just look at this as, as staff, we don't say, I don't know if Phoenix should get exemption allocation. We're saving it for, I don't know what we're saving it for at that point. So I think that's probably the main thought that I keep coming back to.
Well, there's risk, right? That we know that there's risk of our remaining allotment, and this is 8% of our current allotment. And so that's the only risk. And so when I say not yet, the county option is a great one, potentially. I'd just like to maybe just continue this to our next regular meeting.
Yeah, I would, the concept of reaching out to the county with their comprehensive planning process and talking about how they may wish to transfer more into, if in fact that's a type of way that you would target development. Now, of course, that transfers more development at up to 70% into our jurisdiction, and I think that's a much broader community planning and, in fact, now cross-jurisdictional question. But
Let me just ask one more question. How pressing is this decision? Is there something pending this decision, that needs to happen in the next couple weeks?
It came up because they've come in with, what the council saw this evening is 3 6-unit multifamily buildings and a larger multifamily building, but there's also 4 other buildings that qualified for administrative review. It's a pretty substantial investment taking place right now by Phoenix. And so I apologize off the top of my head. There was a gatehouse and there's a few other buildings.
But what we've approved already for the architectural review is covered, they have adequate impervious surface now.
Not with all the buildings combined and all the efforts
Man, I
underway
feel like
right
we
now to
should look at that
redevelop
first
some of the structures. See, there were developments they've done that qualified for administrative review because they met the standards and they were below a certain threshold. So they've got, if you look at the map of the overall redevelopment strategy, the campus plan, I know they're also under contract to work on a plan development for the campus, to rezone it, because that's been the zoning has been a challenge. And so.
So is 30 days create conflict with?
You'd have to ask them. I don't know that answer.
So, yeah, and this ask came about, we're currently under review with the Technical Review Committee as far as the site plan for the same project that you heard for the continuance of the architectural compliance earlier this meeting. So a 30 days would still fit within our approval schedule of the Technical Review Committee. But we do feel
I think that the majority of us are fine with this. I just think that we just want to understand the nuance or the other
Yeah, and
nuances.
I guess we can
I mean, that's what I'm,
My question would be, we would need some direction on what information it is you want in the next 30 days. I know the applicants are willing, staff's willing, but what do
well, I
you
think you answered my question when I said, the second time was, is there another way? And there's not, right? I mean, it's kind of what I heard, other than.
Something like additional exemption allocation, or with, if PNIC is going to continue on the campus plans they have and continue to be viable and continue with their redevelopment strategy, they need additional exemption allocation. Sounds like 30 days isn't going to kill them, but I don't know what we would do in 30 days. Now, what we would do policy-wise as a town in 6 months to 12 months, yeah, it opens up a lot more options to look at it about adopting policies so we know exactly where we will use our 412, or about talking to the county about transferring, or about getting back to the 5 versus 10 issue. That's something you can do in the 6 to 12 month timeframe. So, but in terms of PNIC, I just don't know what we would do in 30 days. And I'm just saying I don't know. So
That's why I ask if there's another, can there be a thought of another way to achieve
I'd be
this?
happy to broach the topic relative to this, and I'm going to have a question for BJ offline that will shape that question to the county. But I'm willing to at least see if there's an initial interest relative to this. That's not a process where you're going to have an intergovernmental agreement drawn up and ready in August, but I can also say that it would not preclude you in 30 days from making an allocation with the understanding that the county was in the process of a transfer. So it would equal out in the end if they were willing to do it. So.
Can we say yes now and still ask the county?
Or at the bare minimum, give it the 30, I'm saying I'll ask the county like quickly, and maybe we'll have an answer in 30 days as to whether they're even interested in pursuing that. Maybe that answer is yes, let's start drawing the paperwork up. I'm just saying it won't be done in 30 days, but if 30 days is a key time period, you would at least know that it's coming back to you or not.
Things that we need to work with the county on and that we need to ask for from the county. And my thought is that given the need for continued care and given the location of it being downtown and it being infill, this is not what we want to use our ask on. I mean, I think that we save that ask for something that will make a big difference to who Southern Pines is, or give us some freedoms within the county, something that makes a difference. I'm not sure that this is what I want to ask the county for.
How much impact do you think it would make to ask the county for, was this a struggle with the Sand Hills Community College? So if they.
To be fair, that's been some time ago, different group, but that was not a struggle at all. It was a very, very positive interaction. But I believe, and I'd have to again go back and look, but I think at the same time, they were also shoring up transfers. I think they did some transfers to Aberdeen at the time. They might have done some to Pinehurst, and that was around some of the extension things that had occurred over time.
So I think to the mayor's.
Again, the answer may just be yes or no. Obviously, there would be arguments to be made around this. That use, be it PNIC, be it their colleagues on the other side of town at Belmead and at St. Joe's. Those are large campuses. They clearly provide a service to an area far greater than just Southern Pines. They are both tax exempt entities. So
they're going to be right in line
We're using valuable
behind PNIC.
land to provide a service to all of Moore County that is not generating property taxes back. So it would be a very small ask, I think, given the size of allocation that Moore County has, to say, can you all kick us over some stuff as they continue to try to meet this need? And I don't think I absolutely agree with what you're saying about some bigger asks later, but I don't think it should preclude or harm those asks either, because I would state the ask needs to be framed in the sense of this is really for all of Moore County, and
Right, it is.
they're
And
serving a need that you're not seeing served in other communities around the county.
Fairly painless way for the county to recognize the fact that the majority of these options are available in Southern Pines, and to honor that fact.
To the mayor's point, though, do we just go ahead and approve it and still ask that question?
That's what, yeah.
I was getting ready to ask
Do
that.
that, then what's our leverage? I mean, how do we make the county aware that, you say, right?
Yeah.
No leverage. I'm perfectly comfortable with that. I only said what I did about 30 days because that seemed to be the direction the group was headed, but.
Right.
Yeah, I don't think approving it tonight precludes you from asking
Okay.
for a transfer either.
You'll, I guess, make that request, because it can't hurt to ask, and all they can do is say is no. We're no worse off
I
place than
think
we
make
would
the
be.
request and have it also anticipate the same, I think this ask is going to breed more asks with the other places that you have mentioned.
Well, I think it's that's, when I said I wanted to talk to BJ, I wanted to see what the situation was with that zoning and those campuses because they've come in and from time to time and talked about expansions too, and see if, because it would be a similar ask. It would be around not so much the specific user in that instance, but the service being provided.
Correct.
And I think I think it could be a good segue into additional conversation around the larger planning concepts, as Mr. Grieve, as Director Grieve stated, relative to the comprehensive planning going on at the county and talk about trying to move development toward the municipalities and keeping the farmland safe. It's,
If the county-
it's an easy way to open the conversation
Right.
around one tool that might help in that direction.
If that's the stance of the county, then thank you, and thank you for supporting us as we deal with infill and development and providing a service for the entire county.
Right.
So,
So I'll say, I'll make a motion to approve the watershed protection permit request 570 per WP-02-24.
Second.
All in favor, vote by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Motion carries.
And yes, Reagan, I guess if you can make that ask somewhat easily, please do. And if it gets that allocation to us, that's great. Thank you.
I appreciate the conversation and input from everyone on that.
St. Joseph of the Pines, Belmead has 94 acres of exemption allocation previously granted.
It does. It was post-93, so they would have asked, I guess, when they developed it?
Yeah, it was requested and granted. I don't have the year yet. We're working on it, but it was requested and granted.
Thank you guys for your patience. Thanks for your patience. Thank you.
Thank you, BJ. I just knew that one was out there too, so.
Yeah, I appreciate the conversation is bigger than PNIC, but I think it was an important one to have. And I think that we do need to look at a policy on how we're granting
I
it,
agree.
even though staff is already working to that
Not-
end.
It would be very easy to add 94 acres, even though we've already granted it from our allocation, and just say, for this particular use, is it something you would consider?
Oh, yeah. 94 plus 36.
There's
Plus,
a few,
plus.
there's a few others in here as well. So if it was an issue of, hey, for CCRC, a nonprofit serving a need
Yeah.
for the community, are you willing to reimburse us, if you
Right.
will, for those acres?
and then I think we put in place our policy, and I think our ordinance needs to reflect our policy, which right now, our ordinance, I think, is a first come, first serve, which is kind of a sloppy way to proceed. Correct me if I'm wrong.
This is not entirely first come, first served. It is in the core area that BJ had referenced, kind of the immediate downtown. But the reason this is in front of you for a decision is the council does have the ability to say no on these.
Right.
The original ordinance was literally first come, first serve. There was no council vote to be had on it. It was just, yep.
Council
here it
has
is.
the ability to be completely arbitrary on how it allocates. I mean, that's,
Technically speaking, yes.
Yeah.
Now, clearly, any decision to say no should reference back to comprehensive planning techniques, and yes.
We also have the ability to be really thoughtful.
that's why, right.
Please.
Make sure your microphone's on, yeah.
I'm not signing on to the phrase
Arbitrary.
arbitrary. No.
Well, I'm just saying, I
It
think
needs
that's
to
the
be
point that
supported
Ann's
by
making
evidence
about
and reason.
a
Yes, thank you.
policy is that the first come, first serve is not arbitrary. But if you could just say no for any reason or no reason at all, then that's why it's probably good to have something as a policy.
Policy.
Yeah.
Yes.
So let's put that on for, I don't know where you are, Madam Mayor, regarding planning session. You had.
Work session.
Work session. You had talked about not doing that this month, but maybe set that. You start saying.
We would not have that ready in 2 weeks.
Right, so if we maybe put that on work session for September, for example.
Or August.
And that would give you time to have also talked to the county about the issue. If that's the proper, is that logistically the proper way to do that? Is that you contact Mr. Vest? Okay.
So, I mean, I feel like we have one in the sense that there is a lens and filter through which I'm hearing the allocation request. But you're just saying put it in writing?
Put in writing, and I think it's, I mean, I think
Like
it's
it's
fair
arbitrary
to residents, developers, and to us, and especially to the planning department, who would know what our intent was. I think, that-
Been using that
It's been
lens.
said before, first come, first serve.
right.
I've never perceived it that way, because I mean, I can't remember. It seems like we've said no to one before. I just,
First come, first serve is like Reagan said, we do use that phrase because within the downtown area, the watershed protection overlay zoning does say exemption allocation shall be granted within certain areas on a first come, first served basis. We've struggled over the years with whether or not that means administratively,
Right.
or whether or not it actually means go to town council. We've erred on the side of going to town council. But yeah, the other areas, no, this is where we then defer to our new comp plan and the old CLRP to get some guidance on that. All this is a great conversation, because yeah, there is a much larger strategic way of thinking about this, of like, hey, if this is a finite resource, then where do we allocate it and when? Comp plan gives us a fair bit of guidance on that. I didn't prepare for tonight, but I could pull out a fair bit of language on that, because when that was written, it was a topic of discussion.
Yeah, if you can do that for that work session. that'd
And
be
I
great.
appreciate what Attorney McCarley said, because I answered your question, yes, but in reality, it's never been an issue of just randomly saying no. I mean, that policy historically has been sort of referenced to the comp plan. Oftentimes, when you see these come through, they will be attached very much to a specific development, like a PDP or a PD, where you're looking at a site plan and you're deciding whether it belongs where it is. And part of that decision is, oh, by the way, there's some allocation coming out. So for
Well,
instance.
I wasn't suggesting the town that Southern Pines has been. I was
No,
suggesting that without a policy,
It
it
could
can be
appear that
viewed
way or
as-
be argued
yes.
that way, right, yeah, but the discussions around this have always been around, be it high-level comprehensive plan type of policies and things, and/or very much tied to a specific development, where part of the decision-making is this a good development or not, and part of that is, oh, by the way, it's going to use X acres of allocation, and does that make sense where the development is located at, so.
Okay, let's move on.
We're doing, like I
All
gotta
right.
add, what we're discussing right now and what would be the result of this, the discussion of the work session, is actually called for in the comprehensive plan under policy 4.8. Evaluate current watershed regulations in the town and revise if necessary to support the 2040 comprehensive plan.
Great.
So a discussion about this, we could add it to our comp plan implementation list, and it's great.
Perfect, thank you. All right, let's talk about annexation. Whoa, did you say something else?
go ahead.
Okay, all
No
right.
presentation to be made on this this evening. Again, this is just step one, and it will set a public hearing for your August meeting, at which time we'll have a full planning staff report and a public hearing as required under the law, and either an approval or denial. Again, it's a bit of an oddity in that it is not a contiguous annexation, but it sits in the middle of a subdivision where there are lots that are part of the town, so.
To clarify that, because on page 198, it says the area described in the petition is contiguous.
Yeah, that will be corrected on the, yeah.
Okay. All right, my thoughts are that we put a lot of time and effort into our planning. What, did someone want to say something? All right, and that I think people appreciate being in Southern Pines for who Southern Pines is and how it looks, which is in our UDO and our planning. And when somebody wants to annex in and join into the services provided by the town, as well as the protection provided by our UDO and our planning department, our planning board and town council, I'm all for it.
So,
But we're simply setting a hearing. I don't
We
disagree
are.
with you, but we're simply setting a
Well,
hearing, so we
clerk,
need
you can
a,
investigate.
sorry, Bill, what'd you say? I'm sorry.
It just says we direct the clerk to investigate application for annexation. So directed.
And we don't need to do a motion or anything for that, we just direct.
We just have to approve both resolutions.
Solutions,
Okay.
yeah. With the correction that it's noted.
Okay, so
We had talked about it.
92 with correction on the
right,
second one.
so we politely request.
Did you just make it?
I'm just saying that's what needs
This
to
is
happen.
1093, this is 1092, yeah.
All right, I'll make a motion that we approve Resolution 1091 and 1092 with the mention, and, oh, is there another one? And 1093 with the appropriate corrections.
Second.
All in favor, vote by saying aye. 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 All right, thank you, guys. Motion carries. And
Like a motion to adjourn.
I would love that, yes. Is there a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.
Are we meeting the end of the month? Are we meeting on the 23rd? What do you want to do about that?
You did not continue anything this evening to that meeting. I've asked staff if there was anything that was super pressing and needed to be dealt with based upon the conversations last meeting, so I'm not pushing for a meeting at all.
What,
I will have your proposed rules of procedure ready this week, and we can discuss those anytime you want.
August sounds great.
Probably want to be present for that, so.
My plan at this point was to drive home
Yeah.
because other stuff had come up, but
No, let's do those rules of procedure in August.
So we are canceled.
Work session sounds like the right thing, because otherwise it's going to be crazy. Do we need to reopen the meeting to do what do you need as far as public notice of the meeting being canceled? Okay, all right. I think everybody's okay with that, right?
I'm not
You
okay.
don't need to come, do you? You good with it if we cancel?
Okay.
I think Anna's going to do something really fun. It's all good. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
You send an updated calendar about getting rid of them.
I will send you. I can't
Just so I
send
know.
the invitation.
Just so I
want to
know.
show up to a dark empty room? I will send you.
Ask her if she can call you before the meeting.
I was like, I kept hearing that date, I was like, that's making a lot of mistakes. I thought she was like sending the council over and over and over. Sorry for the mistake, sorry for the mistake.
This thing, it's just the way it was designed. I love the